And we are live, I think. Hello, everyone. Now it's time for Blaine to say something obscene, which will immediately...
No, don't. Please don't. Please don't.
What?
I just sort of
It's
assumed...
just always in the first, 30 seconds, you end up offhand saying the F word or something.
The F
YouTube
word.
no like
Oh,
this.
man. We're going to get demonetized.
It's not about that. It's about... Okay, never mind. The demonetization doesn't matter. I don't even think we monetize this.
I know. That's why I'm making fun of the idea.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. We have a live stream for you guys. We haven't done one in a couple weeks because we've had Can Jam, and then we've had illness and disease and sickness unto death and depression and all those other reasons. But we're back with all kinds of energy and liveliness.
Had a redundancy there.
Yeah. Well, that's the point. Let's see. Before we launch into today's stream, as usual, this is all made possible by headphones.com. The cops are after me. This is all made possible by headphones.com. Remember, check out headphones.com for your next audio purchase. We also have the forum at forum.headphones.com. We have our Discord. That's where you can chat with us. That should be linked in the description. This live stream, this podcast is also available on podcasting platforms. So you should be able to find it on Spotify as the Noise Floor if you would just like to listen. But other than that, I think we can launch into today's stream, and we have a bunch of topics. It's nice to see everybody there. We will be joined by one Golden Sound in a moment once he gets back from whatever he's doing, being British.
He's trapped behind a combine harvester.
Yeah, he's on his way back to his office. But yeah, there is traffic. So.
Indeed.
But yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So I will be perfectly transparent with our audience and say that the first topic, and to an extent the second topic, both came about because a friend of mine, ADVC, did this incredible piece of art for the 5128 that I wanted to use as a thumbnail. So in this case, the thumbnail did lead the topics of discussion. We'll see how much there is to actually mine down into here.
It's a really good thumbnail, though.
Yeah, it needed to be used. But so our first topic and the title topic is, can perfect measurements exist? I think that's going to come down to how all of us realistically define or think such a thing is even possible. But I'll let you guys.
It's time for fucking semantic arguments. My favorite segment of the Headphone Show.
What do you think this stream is?
I mean, that is really all this can be. But I mean, I think that you can twist this into an interesting dialogue, right? Which is usually what we try to do.
Yeah,
we take a catchy sounding headline and then try to make something that's actually discussable beyond just saying no. Next question.
Yeah,
well, but there is also this
challenge.
There's more to it than that, because there is also this assumption that that's what you're getting when you're looking at a measurement, that you're looking at something like, it's objective, therefore it is telling you the truth about something, and everything else is just noise around it.
That is one set of assumptions.
Yeah. So I think that this is also part of the saying no, or whatever we want to say here, is also part of the demystification process around some of this stuff. Also, I just want to note for folks, if you are new to this stream, we usually pull topics from the forum. There's a thread there where you can contribute your topics. We're running dry, guys. We're running dry. So
we are running very dry. Please
definitely contribute.
Yeah.
But yeah, how do you guys want to tackle this topic? How do you want to? Is there a steel man or a foil or something to tilt against here?
Well, I mean, if Constantine was here, he'd just say, well, it depends on how you define perfect, right? What's your tolerance for perfect?
He would say it with a thicker Austrian accent than that. I think it would be.
Yes, and he would sound smugger.
Exactly.
Yeah, he would.
with a stronger air of superiority.
But I mean, that is basically the question, right? How much error is acceptable while still being called perfect? And if the answer is 0, then obviously the answer to the question is no.
And what
But
is the error that you're like indexing for when you're making this judgment? Like, is it the
exactly.
error on the part of the measurement operator in how well they've kind of represented or characterized the performance on the fixture they're using, or is it error relative to the person viewing the measurement and their experience with the same headphone? It's a sticky wicket.
So supposing you had a way to measure at your eardrum relative to your HRTF. Let's put that scenario out there. What would be the error there? Or basically, what makes that still imperfect? Is that
well,
fair
it's
way
all
of
about the
phrasing it?
reference point, right? Like you would still have error there relative to your perceptions, right? Because your perceptions are not entirely a product of the sound pressure at your eardrum. So there will still be error if we're defining the reference point as the measurement precisely predicts what we hear, because the measurement isn't the totality of what we hear. But conversely, there wouldn't be error because with the reference point being what is actually going into your ear.
Right. So you're able to see everything that's going on acoustically, but you're not able to see everything with how you, are interpreting that, which is
and symmetrically, if you did a brain scan on somebody and it was perfect, I know that such a thing can't exist, but if you did a perfect brain scan on somebody and saw their experiences while listening to things, you would have an accurate model of their perception, but not an accurate model of what was actually happening acoustically.
So what happens if we go? There are several different ways one could go wide with this topic. So in the sense of like, you could take a headphone, measure it at the eardrum of, like do basically that same condition for like say 1,000 people, and then you also took those same 1,000 people and did some sort of listening tests, right? Where then they are indicating, like some sort of listening experiment where you're able to extract from it in the totality of it. If you go wide here, some sort of indication of what all of that means.
I'm wearing the wrong glasses for this.
I like your new glasses.
I thought you were gonna put on like rose-colored glasses or something memey.
I mean, I do have. I mean, I would say that aviators are pretty memey in themselves, but
okay.
I feel like clear ones are not as memey.
Yeah. I do have mirrored ones, but then it wouldn't be. Well, then for one thing, you see like how janky like my setup is.
These just look like you're from the 80s.
More like the 70s, really.
70s, yeah.
That's good. Anyways, you get what I'm saying. Like, what happens if you go wide with this? Is there a way to sort of extract the closest approximation of perfection out of a kind of measurement, rather than trying to say like, like we're looking for this like perfect precision. We're looking for like in the same way that, in your talk you were saying how, in the second one, how, all the Harman research that's gotten done over the years predicts preference, right? You're not necessarily referring to this as like on an individual basis. You're not attaching like some sort of like, this is exactly how it's going to be concept to an individual person, but you're looking at it more again as a matter of predicting general preference, right?
Sorry, I'm answering chat.
So what is the specific question that is raised here? Can we improve upon our estimations of preference?
Again, I'm trying to find the steel man out of this question of our perfect measurements possible. And basically what I'm saying is there a sort of utopian scenario for getting headphone data that gets an approximation of perfection, if you go wide enough.
I mean, an approximation of perfection is just
not perfection. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I mean,
I know. Well, that's why I'm like trying to think of like, okay, is there something asymptotic here where you can get to like, okay, this does a much better job of predicting preference than where we're at right now? And the answer would probably be yes, but getting it to be how probably many within the community actually treat measurements is not possible.
Oh God, yeah, no. I mean, the majority of people treat measurements as having vastly more direct predictive power than they do for people's experiences. Like
Exactly.
that's the
Yeah.
really key thing. I think
Yeah.
that we can. I mean, honestly, measurements are quite good in a lot of respects, right? Like we have a lot of quite good measurement techniques. Most of them aren't very novel. The question is what we're trying to use them for. And trying to use them as a reference for people's experience, we're not so good. I honestly think there it's more about data processing than it is like measurement technique, though. Like something I've been thinking about recently, and I didn't really think about it until I was rereading one of the papers on the sign illusion, but we just use frequency responses on a log scale vertically, right? Well, actually, on both axes, because we're like, oh, well, that maps to human perception, right? Except it doesn't quite. Human perception isn't quite logarithmic in terms of loudness, and our visual perception doesn't follow the same scale as our audio perception. So a peak that exists on a chart will have a different visual magnitude than its audible magnitude.
Right.
Seems like a problem to me, but I also don't know the solution.
Well, I mean, it seems pretty obvious that the solution would be some sort of study probing into that would then affect some sort of novel, either like just a simple SPL compensation or maybe something more elaborate than that.
I mean, that's one where I do imagine that you could get some sort of, interesting data there that would lead you into a better use condition potentially of existing data.
Well, the real problem there is then you'd have a lot of pushback from people who have become acclimated to the current system,
as we have come to recognize quite strongly.
What people push back against making changes? Never.
But no, I mean, like I would say that, like, even though there has been pushbacks, for example, with the stuff that we've done as far as change is concerned, there's a lot of people who've also come on board with it, which is encouraging. Somebody says, well, there's a couple comments here. One, would measuring at the cochlea have a higher margin of error than if we somehow could measure at a real person's eardrum? You mean like measuring like a simulator at the cochlea, or what?
Well, no, if you're at the cochlea, you'd have to be measuring the electrical. Well, you'd either be measuring the pressure inside the cochlea or the electrical outputs of it.
I don't know what we're splitting hairs between cochlea and, like,
well, it's behind the eardrum, so you're either taking the
it's a different
pressure
DRP,
behind
right?
the
Or it's a
eardrum
different reference point. It's not
or
a different
the
reference point.
electrical signal, which I would
Yeah.
actually be very interested to see what the electrical signal looks like, you're not doing that.
Yeah.
It's also quite noisy. Like any practical way to
I
do that,
wouldn't be
even
surprised.
ignoring the ethical issues, is quite noisy.
Even ignoring the ethical issues, as I am wont to do.
Yeah.
Well, I
so
mean, it's yeah.
No, just go ahead. There's a second part to this.
Oh wait, what is the second part of the
No,
question?
sorry. There's a second question.
Oh,
that I
okay.
wanted to-
I do think that in general, the idea that we need to go deeper than the eardrum is kind of a misnomer, though, because like the sound pressure as pressure in air ends at the eardrum. It gets mechanically transduced via our middle ear, and then it goes into pressure variation in a fluid in our inner ear. But anything, we can model that effect very precisely. And frankly, it's not that complicated. It's just that it makes the sound really shitty. So all we would really be doing is fucking with our signal to noise ratio a whole bunch in the frequency extremes.
Yeah.
I know that this was something that Jude was interested in, was the past the DRP. But
I don't agree with that.
Okay. Anyway,
past the DRP or past the eardrum itself?
Well, the reference. Well, basically, other elements of the acoustic system beyond just where beyond the DRP.
Right. Yeah. To me, that says processing stage more than like.
Yeah, that's how I always
different
thought of it.
place to measure SPL, because
well, I mean that's
not much room past DRP
problem.
to measure sound pressure level in air.
No, none. Well, there actually technically there is,
Yeah.
because your ear canal extends because
I
your
was
eardrum
going to
is
say,
angled.
isn't there like some sort of effect on acoustic impedance as a result of like space?
Well, Yeah,
The
of
final
overall
frontier.
volume. But
No, I mean like what space?
No, like if we're talking past the DRP, would that be a variable thing as well, potentially?
I mean, yeah, so is the stiffness and mass of the bones in your middle ear. Like that's
I have
what
one Cameron here.
the
Look who
canal
it
volume,
is.
the mechanical properties of the eardrum and the mechanical properties of the middle ear are what determine your ear impedance.
Right.
I'm glad that
Okay.
we all just kind of unconsciously make Andrew feel like an outlier or
Why?
the odd man out every single time by all of us wearing HD 800s except for him.
I support
Well,
this.
Yeah, where'd Cameron
I have
go?
one here. I could HD 800 up. I don't particularly enjoy that headphone sound. It's got a peak. Okay, let's there was another question or another thing here. Should also define perfect measurement, i.e. technically any measurement is a perfect measurement in those very precise conditions. So
perfection is
that's
a
not unfair.
relationship of goal to output.
we're occasionally getting one Semirun.
He's kind of flickering in and out.
Yeah,
He's caught in the warp zone.
yeah.
I mean, I assume he just got here and he's just kind of getting
Yeah.
set up.
A Cameron interrupted.
Ugh.
All right. Here we go.
Why is this so terrible?
Speaking of
How smell was this past can jam compared to the others? It's a good question, Rob.
I think it was fine. I mean, I didn't leave the booth much, but
I think I would say it was less smell than some of them. I think SoCal has been the worst on average.
yeah, I think so.
it's just colder.
Yeah.
Which is an improvement.
Less sweaty.
Yeah. Okay, so are we done with this topic? I'm kind of done with this topic. Like, I think the answer is just no. Unless there's anything else, I don't
no.
have anything else to say.
I think there's plenty to unpack here. It just depends kind of how deep we want to go.
Mhm.
Like when it comes
Can you
to
guys hear me okay?
We can.
Hello. Yes.
Yeah, totally.
Hello.
You're coming through loud and British.
Loud and that's good, I guess.
It is.
Mm.
It's ideal.
Loud's
I'm
good.
sorry, I'm late. I was stuck behind
Wow.
several pieces of farming equipment.
I was going to say the opposite.
Damn.
I was going to say British is good. I live in British Columbia.
Ah, that's why you have all of these sympathies that we have to constantly unpack. And
I thought you were going to say that's why you have all of these symptoms.
yeah, all the symptoms of yours that are based on like where you were
Yeah, the
born.
British. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
You
yeah,
good,
what's the rest of this topic, Griffin? Please.
Oh, okay. I mean, for me, it's like should perfection even be expected at any point? Obviously not. But I think we should probably trust the measurements we have when conducted properly for what they are, which I think there's a lot of doubt about. For example, I put a 6xx on my rig and I measure it at one position and then another position, and I can generally trust that the difference in those positions, at least on that ear, is accurate, right? Like if I move the headphone forward, I will get less treble. If I move it backwards, I will get more treble.
Mhm.
And as far as I'm aware, that is like as close to an ideal relationship between expectation and output as you can get.
Right.
So I think perfection for all of this is largely about how aligned the expectations with the viewer of the measurement are with the reality of what will likely happen and what the bounds of possibility are there. So I guess my answer to this is perfect measurements might exist, but perfect interpretation is rare.
a generically defensible position.
Jake
I think the
says
same kind of goes for source scale measurements as well. I'm sorry, I don't know if you guys touched on that, but
No, it's all been headphones.
No.
I mean, with source scale measurements in particular, you see a lot of people saying like, "Oh, well, there's things that we can't measure yet." It's like, well, what? Because actually, existing measurement gear, even though perfect measurements, meaning infinite accuracy and no noise or whatever, can't exist, but we can already measure stuff down to Johnson noise levels and at ridiculously high frequencies, well above what could even if you do say, okay, well, we can only hit a 20K, but let's call it 100. Screw it, let's call it a megahertz just to be sure. Like we can do ridiculously accurate measurements at those frequencies. Interpretation is the limiting factor, I think, in both source gear and headphone measurements nowadays. Not so much the sort of technical advances.
I was sort of thinking about something related to this. You do see a lot of folks who are sort of like, who push back on measurements as indicating that, there's something that we're not measuring. Like that's a common thing that I've come across. But my thought there was like, well, even if you could measure, even if it, like, say you had, instead of frequency response, you had technical response. I don't, just as an example, like whatever, X factor non-frequency response thing. That, given what we know about positional variation, for example, on different heads, or like just HPTF variation, positional variation, even on the same head, given what we know about that, you would have the same things would probably be true for any other metric that you're trying, like with headphones at least, given how variable they are, their behavior is. So I don't know why there is such resistance to the idea of frequency response on its own being the thing that is responsible for that. Just because there is such a bigger unknown,
Yeah. There's a lot of people, though, that I think are wanting or expecting, and it's hard to explain why there isn't a single separate number that explains something subjective. Like, we, at the end of the day, we hear sound as a combination of different frequencies at different amplitudes and different times. But we can't just give this is a soundstage number or this is a detailed number, because it's a combination of these other things which we are measuring. The problem is,
well, we can give the number, it's just not based on anything.
You my sources, I made it the hell up.
Yeah,
it's I think a lot of it comes from people wanting a simpler, easier to interpret, or sliding scale answer to a specific subjective experience. When it's not possible to do that, for the simple reason that just because it may seem to us perceptually as a simple independent thing, it's very much not. It's our brains doing a lot of very complicated work to everything that we see and hear is an illusion effectively created by our brain, and it's not reasonable to expect that what we perceive as independent things are going to show up in data or in theory as independent things.
But have you considered that actually everything that we perceive is absolutely independent from the world, and that our brains simply exist in preordained harmony with the physical world in which we exist?
I'm doing this for you, Griffin.
Leibniz gang. Leibniz gang.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, that's trivially true, and it's something that I think a lot of people don't quite grasp when they assume that measurements are super predictive. There's this concept that, like, we talk a lot about the whole, if you can hear it, you should be able to measure it. If you can hear it in the sound, if it's something in the signal, then it obviously must be measurable, because we can measure a lot better than we can hear. But people often flip to the other side of, just because I measured it, clearly I must be able to hear it because it's a real thing. But our perceptions are not so linear.
There's I don't know. I like the idea of trying to still attach meaning to the things that we can measure, even if that meaning is not universal. Like, I know, Blaine, you're a little bit like, hesitant about that kind of stuff, but I'm thinking of like situations where when I'm listening to a particular recording, the way that playback equipment handles that recording in particular regions and relationships for that playback equipment that we can measure, and the sort of like, subjective psychoacoustic effect that this relationship imparts for that recording. And the example that I like to give is like, the Focal headphones have that bump at around like 1.5 kilohertz, often, and there is a frequency response relationship there between 1.5 kilohertz and the way that the lower mids are handled often, or like lower mids upper bass is handled on those headphones, that makes it so that a lot of piano recordings sound incredibly detailed. They sound a little bit, maybe a bit more intimate because they're pulled forward, but there's this extra element of clarity and detail that comes through for those recordings in the way that that's handled. And I don't think it's unreasonable to say, well, you can measure the cause of this effect. Like you're not basically needing anything else to explain that, is what I'm saying. You can basically, the reason why I'm confident that that's what's causing it is when you EQ one of those things, the effect goes away, right? If you drop 1.5 kilohertz, that sort of detail element goes away. If you drop, the section in the upper bass, suddenly things get lean and glary and unpleasant, right? So it's like, this is an effect that gets created, and we can talk about those effects, even if the measurement like that we're traditionally used to is how does that whole section fit relative to the target or the HRTF or whatever else, right? And so this kind of goes back to something that Precog Vision was talking about, which is detail is tasteful coloration. The things that people are so uniquely focused on in audio I would say even implicitly, those of us who don't give a fuck about things like detail are still at some level giving a shit about the subjective effects, right? Even if we interpret it differently, even if we interpret it as not, the colorations, I think there's still something inherently true there about the effect being the thing that we're all chasing, not necessarily the cause. So anyways, I don't know, like I'm not sure exactly where it's going with this, but the point for me more is that, like, yeah, you can still measure all of these things, right? And just because we have an imperfect analysis doesn't mean that we can't improve on all of that, and we can give a anecdotal description of how that affects
and also, just because we don't have a perfect analysis or interpretation right now, it doesn't mean that we should just give up on working towards a better analysis or interpretation. Like, a lot of people seem to take the argument that, well, it's not perfect now, so I'm just going to completely ignore it and call them pointless.
Chuck it out, baby, with the bathwater.
Okay, well, we're never going to get a better analysis then, because,
but I don't know, like, am I alone in this? Like, or maybe I know I'm not alone in this, but like, is this the minority where basically, like, it's fascinating to me that you can basically, like, you can listen to something and go, wow, this is this crazy effect that I'm hearing with this piano recording or whatever it is, right? And then you can measure it, and you can figure out exactly why, based on a traditional, frequency response measurement, right? That we're like, you don't need to look in time domain, you don't need to look at harmonic distortion, you don't need to look at all these other, different metrics to uncover exactly what the cause is of that experience. To me, that's fascinating.
It will be worth noting that we think that we've explained it. We don't actually have proof, and in those cases, you can end up reading the tea leaves very easily.
Well,
like, just because we're using the right measurements doesn't mean that we're immune to the same problems as the people who look at the time domain stuff.
Yes. Well, I'm not sure I agree with that, but I get what you're saying. It's more that, like, I'm only talking about this as like an anecdotal thing, because, like, there's no guarantee that, like, how I attach meaning to this thing based on that song that I'm listening to, that's going to track for other individuals. I mean, certainly, like, with respect to the things that I'm talking about here, it is in the bands that are a little bit more predictive. So we could say at the very least, like, I'm getting that 1.5 kilohertz bump relative or that frequency relationship. Most people are probably getting that if they're coupling correctly.
Yeah, and I mean, I think piano is a pretty good instrument to do this about, because especially on kind of like a soft piano solo arrangement, let's say, there's not really much information above 3K anyway, unless they're hitting very hard. So kind of the relationship you're talking about, I feel like, would be both fairly invariant across listeners based on their anatomy, but also, like, there's basically no way that I could think of where, like, a dip in the same spot we see a bump in like the 1.5K region, like would be perceived as like more detailed than the peak that we see. You know what I mean? Like, as much as, yes, we can absolutely fall victim to similar issues where we're drawing correlations where they may not exist for everyone, I think the one example you used is one where I think we could be fairly confident in, like that coloration eliciting a certain response and the inverse of that coloration eliciting an opposite response.
The absence of that. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
But
it's just the example you used. I think overall there's a lot. It's a lot stickier usually.
Here's the thing though, like I think there's probably something where you could do an analysis. You could do some sort of study where you figure out like, okay, is this a common way that people are attaching meaning to this, right? And who knows what the actual outcome would be there. But I do think that it's, with respect to preference, it becomes a stickier wicket, in the sense that you cannot know at all if this is something that people enjoy with the music that they like. I can feel maybe a little bit more confident that it's going to create this effect for people when they're listening to these recordings, but whether or not that's something that they like, I have no idea.
Yeah, I feel like there are parts of that affect one of the items you touch on in your video that's coming out tomorrow, which for those who are curious what I'm talking about, keep your eyes peeled tomorrow. Andrew's got a really fun video, actually. I really enjoyed this video.
I still need to think of a title for it, but yeah, it's the.
You'll get there.
I'll get there.
I actually want to go get another drink. But do you guys want to
you're such an alcoholic.
Wait for like 30 seconds, or do you want to move on to the next topic?
Let's wait for 30 seconds.
Okay, I'll be right back.
Yeah.
These questions always bring out interesting takes in chat.
Okay, let's go through some of them.
I've just been watching Blaine's face, like whilst he's responding. I can tell when he's responding because he just goes.
Let's go through some of the chat if you guys want to. Which takes are you wanting to address here, Blaine?
I mean, most of them I've already addressed in chat, but you've got the people saying, "Oh, it can't all be FR because if two headphones are EQ'd the same, they won't sound the same, et cetera," or can that be demonstrated they'll sound the same? And of course, that leads us into no, because we can't EQ them the same consistently. That's the whole problem. There's the maybe less standard take of, because we have different anatomy, everyone perceives sound differently, which I think is super common. Like that one's something I've heard at Can Jam quite a few times, is the explanation for differing taste, which I think has really no evidentiary basis whatsoever. I don't know why that became like the standard assumption. Like, we all have different eyes. Do we prefer different kinds of light? Demonstrably no in most cases. Anyway.
Although you and I definitely do have a different preference for amount of light.
You have photophobia. That's not the same thing.
Well,
one is a pathology.
Blaine likes his amount of light the way he likes his headphones. Bright as the fucking sun.
I am not ashamed at all.
Do this, man.
I'm not ashamed at all about the fact that I like being outside and using my computer in the sun.
Hey, I enjoy that as well, but yeah, I don't like light mode.
Not to sound like a plant, but sunlight kind of slaps.
Yeah. Sunlight's all right. Sunlight's all right.
Not that big on carbon dioxide though.
Mr. Super says people do prefer different photo editing styles, and I think that's maybe a better parallel.
Yeah, but that's sort of like saying people prefer different music. Like I'm talking.
Yeah, I think that's
a platitude.
Artistic sort of stuff rather than.
Yeah.
Well, there's maybe a question in of itself: is how much is this artistic preference, and how much of it is sort of a sensory difference, which I don't quite know how you'd go about working that out. To be honest,
it becomes
besides I think really obvious differences in how you are actually perceiving like peaks or something.
For light, it's pretty easy because you can literally adjust the spectrum and bandwidth of light that you expose people to in various circumstances. And when we do, we find that people generally like fairly full bandwidth light with slants in color in a fairly predictable range, right? Like people generally.
No, I know, but what I mean is, if you're doing that kind of research, effectively preference research on, light or photo editing styles, how do you separate what is a difference in preference as a result of sort of a difference in just pure artistic enjoyment or interpretation or whatever, someone getting a different mood out of a photo versus a, like we have with different HRTFs and stuff, a difference in actual sensory perception leading to a difference in preference.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that'd be harder to measure as well.
You can't measure stuff at the eardrum. Oh, sorry, you can't measure stuff at the iris in the same way that you can in with an eardrum. Well, not very easily, and not without. I'm sure there's probably a way to do it, but it's probably not very pleasant.
I don't think it's pleasant in either case, but I was just gonna say though, like the preference itself is such a weird thing in the sense of like it's like we have a sense of the kind of preference that people like, for bass and treble, but we don't have a sense of what people like as far as what they prefer for things like other frequency band relationships, like more narrow frequency band relationships, basically,
or how those relationships would change over time.
Sure,
or how they would change with
100%. And that's
like
that
different
to me
exposures.
Yeah, and that's because there's an infinite possible number of combinations, or maybe you know what I mean. There's like just you could have so many different things to look at there. It becomes difficult to even begin something like that. But I tend to think that's where there's a major gap in terms of the way that let's say the audiophile world approaches things and what the measurements are sort of indicating. There's sort of the indication of, or what the existing measurements are indicating, which is sort of like, all right, this tracks reasonably well with the bass to treble delta that people enjoy, right? Let's take that as a basic thing that we can glean from the measurements. But what they are indexing for is the more narrow frequency band relationships that are eliciting these effects, and we have no idea what people's preference is when it comes to those kinds of things, or we have very I shouldn't say no idea, but we have little idea.
And they might not even be narrow, they may be quite wide, but they just might be about relation to the mid-range in a way that hasn't
100%.
been quantified.
I just mean narrower than the typical bass to treble,
than literally the full spectrum.
Yeah.
By the way, there's a question from chat that I'm interested to shout out here.
Please.
Yes.
Lucas L says, I'd like to hear why Andrew doesn't talk about DACs and amps, and why Cameron hasn't been able to convert him to care.
Well,
that's a great question.
You've answered the first question. The second one.
Wait, I think it's a bit of a case of, just Andrew generally feeling that whilst, there are certain instances as to where, like at Munich, the tube amps and stuff, for example, he heard a difference there and had a different preference for a different headphone on a different amp. But that's a pretty drastic example of
tube amps, man.
Source sounding different. Yeah. Measurably, they behave very differently.
And they looked cool.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I imagine it's just a bit of a case of really, regardless of the difference being there or not, they just don't make anywhere near as much difference as headphones, and so you're just not really all that interested.
I have a slightly spicier perspective on this stuff. I actually do care about DACs and amps. I actually like. I don't know why.
Clip that.
I actually do care about DACs and amp. Yeah, I care about them in terms of things like form factor and function. So like the idea of like something like the JDS Element 4 seems like a great thing to recommend. But for myself, because I don't need a DAC to do EQ. I can do that myself. But for myself, I do also care about DACs and amps in the sense of I want something to be form factorally good and not.
That's not what they're asking.
I know that's not what they're asking, but I'm saying I care about DACs and amps with respect to that. I care about DACs and amps with respect to, does it have the outputs that I want? Does it have the sufficient gain or whatever because I'm testing lots of different headphones, low noise floor, low output impedance. Like these are things that I genuinely do care about because I have to test a wide range of headphones, and I'd rather not have to have different devices for this.
This is some Bill Clinton. I did not have sexual intercourse with that.
What are you talking about? Dodging. No, I'm getting to it. I'm saying I do care about DACs and amps in that respect. Where the reason
you used to care about it in a different respect as well.
Sorry, what?
And you used to care about it more in the way I think
before I was doing the level match blind comparisons, where I realized there's no reason to care about any of this. But to the core of the question, which I think is, why don't you review? unless I'm misparsing this question, but I sense
no. It's not why don't you review? It's why don't you care?
Or why he doesn't talk about them?
Like, why I don't talk about them?
That doesn't require you to review DACs and AMPs.
Okay, but I still don't talk about them, right? Like that's part of the same supervening thing. I don't talk about them
because you don't care.
It's because I don't care, and I don't care because I've done the blind AB, or I've done the AB switcher. Well, I did, that did actually have an X function, but I've done it, which revealed to me that I have no reason to care. But the bigger point here is I actually, and this is where Cameron, feel free to jump in and argue with me, but I actually feel like the tendency for the industry to prop up DACs and amps as having a sound is itself, in my view, a scam. And in that respect, I don't want to talk about DACs and amps because I don't want to perpetuate this false narrative.
Blaine endorsed take.
So it's a Blaine endorsed take. I personally disagree, but I think the answer sort of that I would give is I'm into, and I review DACs and amps and stuff, but I'm also going to be quite transparent with people that the headphones make 100 times more difference than your DAC or amp will, other than certain edge cases or particular factors as to what one amp can't power this headphone, and so it's going to make more difference if you get one that can. Like it's a bit like saying, Andrew, you're really into cars. Why don't you care about the design of the gear shifters? Like, it's just a gear shifter. Maybe there is a small difference there, but I just care about the car.
But I do care about the things that make more. I care about knob feel, right?
Yes, he cares about the shifter, but he doesn't care about the gearbox.
Yeah,
I'm an advocate for using a good DAC and amp, but it's one of those things where I think it's really easy, and all too often people do overstate how much of a difference they make in comparison to the speakers, the room that you're in, the headphones that you're listening to, the pads on your headphone. Those will make a bigger difference than changing your DAC or amp will. And so,
I mean, like, I will see. Here's the thing, though, right? Like, we're talking about things where ultimately I think we do agree that, like, there have been times when I have felt that I have heard a difference in a DAC and an amp, and me reporting what my subjective experience has been there, I don't think is like wrong for having felt that I've had that experience. It's just that the idea that you can't understand those things in terms of measurements, in terms of like objective information data, like things like, for example, output impedance relationships, or something else, like whatever it might be. Like there for anything where there's an experience that is a genuine experience that holds up in blind conditions, there is a measurable, understandable cause, right?
Yeah.
And the idea that
I don't think I found
I don't think you're saying anything contrary to that.
Like there's no sort of fairy dust going on. Every like it, in any instance where I've been able to, because I've got the board and everything, do an actual AVX between DACs or an amp and hear a difference, there's been something measurable to explain it. There have been cases where it's been something measurable, which, like, if I were to just look at that measurement without having done the blind test, I would have gone, that's probably not audible, but it seems to be, or at least there's something there. But in any case where, two devices are in every way that you can test measurably the same, then I've not been able to hear a difference between them.
I
disagree with the
go ahead.
I was going to say, I still to somewhat disagree with the premise of calling something transparent just because, with a DAC and with a DAC especially, but amps also, there are so many factors compared to like with a headphone that can be different, that especially where we don't necessarily for all of them know, like just the filter alone, just because that's the one which I've done the ABX video on, so I'll bring that up. Like, just the fact that we don't know where the necessarily audibility thresholds for every single person might be means that, even if you have a topping D90 which measures 124 dB SINAD and it's perfect in every way, but it doesn't have a perfect filter, is it still transparent, or does that one factor alone discount it? Is it better to have something which is more transparent in this one area, even if it's not transparent in another? Like, I can't think of a single device where every single aspect about it is what I would describe as perfect. And so I don't like using the term transparent, but that also doesn't mean that with a lot of these devices, the differences between them aren't incredibly minor, if audible at all.
Lucas says, is this why Cameron hasn't made a follow-up video about blind testing differences in DACs after the previous one where the end result was that he had the hearing of a bat?
Well, it was 1 kilohertz above 20k, so I don't think it's
it was
that.
2.
I also haven't tested recently to see if I can still hit that, because that was a year and a bit ago now.
Just that bit's gone now. Time to redo it.
Just that bit. Exactly 1.1 kilohertz.
Yeah.
I mean, well, pretty much, yeah, because the problem there is that, like, well, if that factor I now know I can audibly differentiate between, regardless of whatever else is going on, then any ABX test I do where I can hear a difference between them could just be explained by that. So I kind of need to wait until I can not hear that now, and then I can look at the other stuff. Because again, like, you know, even if you're just talking about upsampling, there's certain manufacturers which, regardless of the quality of their filter, brag about, you know, having modulators that are accurate to minus 300 or minus 800 dB instead of the usual minus 150 or whatever. Does that matter when you can't even, you know, measure it below the analog noise floor? Some will say that they do, but I can't test that until the other factor's gone.
Yeah, I wonder how they even tested it.
Yeah.
Well, they do. The problem is they claim they do their own listening tests, and we don't know what the methodology is there. I'm pretty dubious about all that. It's an area where it's like, okay, it's cool that they've done it, and it's hard to argue that it's bad, but it's also hard to argue that it's going to be audible.
Yeah,
I mean,
like, I do have one more thing that I feel like hasn't been discussed between you two on this topic,
sure.
which is that. And this is maybe where there's a little bit of a difference between like Cameron and Andrew or Cameron and I. Cameron likes headphones, so they have headphones they're happy with, and thus they are like, well, no, like Cameron likes the Hi-Fi Man Susvara, right?
Cameron experiences joy,
and they're like, okay, I like this enough in that, you know, maybe a small adjustment from a DAC amp stack with lossless music and whatever will make a positive difference, not a huge one, but enough that, like, you know, it feels worth it to me. With Andrew, he likes the Susvara, but he's always going to reach for an EQ first before doing any of that stuff. And I know Cameron, I think, adds a bass boost to the
with the exception too, though, like, we're talking, there's situations where that's not true. Like, for example, tube amps, right, where it's like as Mark Ryan was saying, like, you have no idea what's going on there. I'm not, when I have my EQs, you know, like, that's not the same as listening to it off of a Felix Envy 25th anniversary edition or something like that. So it's like, if somebody is looking for that, I'm not going to tell them, yeah, just EQ it. Like, they're looking for something that is different. They're looking for something
that is
separate. But no, I actually don't. Like, I don't agree with that argument. I
okay,
think,
go ahead.
If anything,
well, hold on. What do you think the argument is first? Because I don't know that
because the tube amp is like, one, like a more dramatic difference than, you know, a solid state amp or whatever. But two, I guess by your own admission, has a certain coloration that is harder to quantify in frequency response, or
it doesn't. I think what Andrew's saying is it has enough of a drastic, enough of a coloration objectively measurable to the sound that, you know, it is definitely audible, but it's also separate from FR, because it doesn't change FR. I think there might be like a tiny little bit of roll off as you go towards DC. But it's the distortion profile which is being changed, not the FR. So it's not something that you can just EQ into your sound.
Okay, sure. I guess what I'm
hold on,
thinking of in my characterization of not this argument, but kind of Andrew as a person interacting with headphones, is that the EQ is always going to make a bigger difference for his preference, right? Than any piece of.
Well, yes, but the idea that somebody would have, say, a Susvara or whatever, and that's the headphone that they love, so they're going to now try and see, okay, what is the piece of source equipment that is going to be best for this thing? If for them the piece of source equipment that will be best for this thing is a tube amplifier of some kind, me telling them just EQ your shit isn't really a helpful piece of advice, right? Because they're looking for a tube-like sound that my EQ profile for them is less likely to ameliorated.
I wasn't necessarily commenting on what would be best for
Okay.
other people. I was just kind
for
of
me, it is, of course,
explaining
EQ.
why
Yes.
EQ is always going to supervene your choice
Yes.
to explore DACs and amps, because
Yes.
the difference is going to be both bigger, more like knowable, but
Well,
also like
there's
you
actually
can just
going to be
do
a
different
difference.
shit. Like I feel like for definitely for me, but also for you, like a notch somewhere in the treble is going to make a bigger difference for preference
100%.
than any other thing you can get from a DAC or an amp, right?
100%. So the thing that I wanted to say with all of this is that, like, the whole the question really becomes about situations where, like, Cameron, your blind testing video was to do with two pieces of source equipment that we might traditionally think of as being below the audible threshold of mattering, right?
That was the point.
That was the point.
I wanted to pick something where it's like,
where,
by all the normal stuff that people
exactly.
talk about, it's transparent.
Yeah. In practice, when we're talking about whatever exists on the market, you're likely to find differences. You're likely to find a lot more variation in kind of where that, whether it's, more traditionally above that audible threshold, or like significantly closer to being audible than whatever those examples were that you used. I don't remember off the top of my head. And so, and you might have other things that are contributing to any differences that you might actually genuinely perceive, like, for example, distortion versus level. Or you could have other things like IMD products or whatever, right? Those are things that in practice, I think there's a reason for people to care about that. My issue with the whole thing is still the idea that any sort of sense of this amp sounds like this can be gleaned from any of this. That's where my problem with the whole thing is, right? And so in light of that, how would we be able to then recommend a pairing to somebody beyond just, oh, I just happen to like this? To me, there's just a big mystery scrungle there, where it's like, even if there is something that is genuinely making a difference, the idea that it has a sound that is doing a thing, that doesn't make any sense to me.
It's tricky because, with something like frequency response, where we've got a lot of research on it and its preference and its effects, whereas with a lot of, just different distortion profiles, even if they are unquestionably high enough in level to actually be audible, we don't really know what the effects are. There's just not much that's been done to look into it. There's some studies on baseline to sort of level of audibility in a specific condition.
Yeah.
But then a lot of the time that still leaves questions as to what about if the structure was slightly different, or if it was a different order or something. And we don't know what the specific subjective effects are. So we should
do research on that stuff specifically. I feel like that's
we should. And at some point, I've got like just I haven't published it anywhere, and I want to at some point, but it's just like my own kind of notebook of basically correlations between certain behaviors that I've noticed trending in different products and a specific subjective effect, from really basic stuff, just like, second order harmonic stuff sounds warmer, to like the distortion versus frequency behaviors that certain stuff seems to have, and a specific subjective characteristic seems to have, with the sort of triple sweetness or whatever. And some of it is a little audiophile language, because that's the point. You're trying to tie that to objective behaviors. And it's tricky because, like, the reason I tell people I wish more people would sort of talk about the measurements is because that's how you end up getting that information. We
100%.
will never get a sort of better understanding if everyone sort of either pretends it doesn't exist, or pretends it's useless, or just doesn't take an interest in it.
Yeah.
But yeah, at the moment, it's a crapshoot. It's pretty tough.
Yeah. And so, like, to circle back to that original question, it's not that I don't. For me, it's that the threshold for caring is sufficiently low.
I think that's what I expected. Like, I think it's a case of, regardless of all the differences and stuff, for you, it just doesn't really make enough of a difference, especially for the cost, for you to care.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing I'd say is, for me, like, I'm quite happily to admit that for a lot of stuff, it's not just the sound; it is the engineering and design and just some of the stuff that's gone into it. That's like, regardless of whether I think something's good or bad, it's like that's cool. Yeah,
like the Hi-Fi Rose stuff.
Appreciate that.
I look at that stuff. That stuff's so like it's like a watch.
Yeah, the Hi-Fi Rose stuff's cool. Pretty.
Yeah. Okay. Should we move on?
Yeah, just 1 second. I'm consulting on how one would simulate certain types of distortion.
There's a tool called Distort. I think it's just distort.audio.
Yeah, it's by Paul Kane.
We did that, and then we did that in an article a long time ago.
Distort.org. What the hell is the? No.
I don't know what distort audio is. Does it let you let you control individual harmonics, or is it just kind of?
It lets you control the transfer function of the distortion.
Yeah, you put a file in. You can then add harmonics at whatever level and sort of structure you like. You can kind of program it, and then it'll spit out a file with the harmonic distortion added. So you can effectively simulate different distortion profiles.
Yep. So Oris was asking about something I think more like multi-band. So for example, if you wanted to add distortion to the bass but not to the rest of the spectrum.
I gave
a suggestion. It's
there are some like production plugins I'm aware of that you can do that, but they're like VSTs, and so you would need to either route it through that, or I mean maybe you could do something. Actually, no.
Yeah, the thing is, a lot of those don't actually give you the hands-on control of like, because they don't. People making music don't typically care about what order of distortion they're getting. They care more about the effect that they're hearing. But there is one plugin by a guy named Chris. His project is called Air Windows, and he has a plugin called Path Nutty, which does let you kind of dial in individual harmonics, but it's across the whole spectrum. So you would need to like duplicate the track and then like
it sounds like a Vince Staples track, basically. No? Okay.
Sorry, I didn't hear the beginning of what you were saying.
Oh, actually,
sounds like a Vince Staples song.
You couldn't even just do a band split, because then if your harmonics fall into the spectrum above where your crossover is, then they wouldn't be present. Oh god, that is mathematically that's a little tricky.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on.
Okay, so this one actually kind of I feel like Cameron said something maybe like 5-10 minutes ago that really tied into this, where it was about kind of trusting the people. But so the second topic is, actually I don't have Discord open anymore, so I don't know the exact verbiage I used, but I think it didn't matter. So 1 second. Unless someone else wants to read it and has Discord open.
To be clear, I don't like Vince Staples, but of course I know who Vince Staples is.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, I'm surprised you even said that. Okay. So the next topic is, can you trust imperfect measurements more than you can trust audio files?
Yes.
Depends on what you're measuring. Because some measurements can be, I think, imperfect would be a generous description of them.
I mean, we
some measurements can be just not helpful, but outright misleading. So I think there's a sort of minimum threshold there. Like, if I see a measurement done on a mini DSP ears, I don't even pay any attention to it. Like,
it depends how. Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like there is a degree of imperfection that permeates even the people using standardized expensive rigs, or
say for example
that are better.
The graphs that you helped me out with there, Griffin, the relative to Harman, where it's showing something that measures reasonably well relative to Harman, but Harman's smooth, and then the unsmooth version reveals that there's a meaningful, like a 7 dB peak. From the DFH or TF, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's an example where that's I don't know if I would say sufficiently imperfect, but I can see a situation where the measurement wouldn't reveal that to somebody. A person would judge this headphone to be good based on the measurements, but an audiophile would hear that peak and judge it to be bad. And in that scenario, I could see the audiophile being the more reliable, report. With that said, there are so many situations where even my subjective sense of it, as somebody who's listened to all this shit for years, and I'm sure you guys are the same way, is unreliable, right? Like my sense of something of something sound is subject to the same fallibility that we all are, the sort of like the downsides of human fallibility. And I realize so much of this has to do with the things that we're paying attention to at the time, because an example might be like, I get particularly bothered when there are lower treble peaks, and this is lower treble and mid treble peaks. But me focusing on that when I'm just listening to something without knowing how it measures might cause me to ignore or miss issues in the mid range, for example. And in that respect, even the imperfect measurement is likely to be, well, again, depending on how imperfect, but the smoothed Harman target measurement is going to be much more reliable than the fact that I missed that. You know what I mean?
So I mean, I think. Oh, go ahead.
There's sort of an issue here of, pardon me, the difference of someone you trust versus a generic audiophile on the internet. So a random measurement versus someone who I have found to be pretty consistent in their impressions and whom I believe to be a skilled listener is going to be much harder than a random measurement versus some random Reddit post. The latter of which I think
the randomness of the measurement is the straw man here, though, because like you can a random measurement could include. Oh, am I clipping? Sorry. A random measurement could include. Is this better? Am I clipping now? Yelling loudly.
Oh, you're good.
Okay. A random measurement could include something all the way to the end of like, a microphone in free air or something, like something that's not actually all that useful. But if we're taking realistic scenarios here, say somebody measures an IEM with a clone coupler, right? Or something like that, or a 065 over your headphone with the 065. Should we trust that versus somebody who we trust, right? And then the inverse, that versus some random, audiophile on the internet. I think, you have to qualify it with, who the person is. But I will still say, even in the best case scenario, which is somebody who you definitely trust their impressions, right? Say, I'm going to pick an example of a person, right? Like say, well, I was going to say Kyle, but that's not exactly the best indication.
I mean, I would trust Kyle's impressions; they're quite consistent.
He's a good listener. I'm not. This is not casting aspersions on his listening ability. I just know that he likes things that are.
Oh, him liking something is no predictor at all for it being good. But I think that his impressions are generally good.
Yeah. So, but anyways, you get my point that even in the best case, there are things that we are prone to missing that a measurement is helpful for. So in my mind, it's like you have to have both. Like no matter what, you need both of those things. One is not a sufficient. Like I guess you can get an indication, right? Like, and ultimately, if you don't like something, the disqualification aspects of that are much more powerful and more reliable than, oh, this is okay. I really like this. The more positive kind of reports that you see.
Yeah, I think my thinking on this is that there is a bar that the measurement needs to clear before I will take it over the word of an audiophile. Mm-hmm. And it might be higher than most people would think. Like, so for example, actually, this is a great example because it's the person we were just talking about. Kyle got to hear the Soft Ears Volume S, or even prior to that, heard the Dunu Da Vinci, and heard them as very like shouty, like very.
I heard the Volume S is shouty too.
Yeah, but not the Da Vinci, right? Like the Da Vinci.
Not really, no.
Yeah, it kind of has more of a like bass forward, lower mid forward kind of thing. But none of the measurements we see of the Da Vinci would necessarily reflect that impression. But I don't think the measurements of the Da Vinci are exhaustive enough to really discount that.
So, say that again? You don't think?
So Kyle is hearing the Da Vinci as less lower mid-rangey and more upper mid-rangey. None of the measurements show that, but none of the measurements we have are necessarily all that exhaustive. Like,
what are you talking about? Even the 5128 Like, are you
Even the
talking about even like
5128
acoustic?
data, because most people are just taking 5128 data at a single length
Oh, I
of
see what
the
you're
ear
saying.
canal. And
Okay.
Kyle, as I found out when he listened to my Volume S, has an extremely long ear canal.
You know what they say
Like-
about guys with long ear canals?
Low length modes.
So like lower than mine even?
Yes,
Really?
actually, like 5.9 kilohertz.
Oh, that's okay. Mine's at 6.1 typically.
Yeah. But the reason that matters is because at
Okay, so when you say
at a
shouty,
longer
you're
length volume,
saying
he's going to be getting less of the stuff under
right.
like
Okay,
2 kilohertz or whatever,
sure.
relative to the treble, which is now also significantly boosted in that kind of 5K and periphery area.
But
So
this is also like IEM scrungles, and IEMs are lo-fi for all of these reasons.
well, yeah, but
I mean,
the IEM community is the one that like
I know, and this is
is
the irony.
crazy about measurements.
I know, and this is the dumb thing about all of it is that like if you're like the answer to this question for me shifts a bit if we're talking about IEMs versus over-ear headphones because of some of these issues with IEMs to do with length modes where you can't to do with length modes for starters, but also to do with the whole HRTF pinna effect assumption thing, right?
Fit
like
also
fit for sure, right? Like to me it changes a lot. Like if somebody tells me go ahead.
Sorry, I was gonna say a lot of times when we're asked a question, we basically all answer it like we're talking about a low acoustic impedance over your headphone, which is probably something we should think about.
Yeah. But you're absolutely right, Griffin, that this is where the measurements are like the most sniffed.
Yes, but they're also imperfect enough that we should probably be a little bit more intentional or a little bit more sure, I guess, before we kind of decry someone's impressions as, weird
Erroneous.
with no explanation, at least.
I will say
there very
though,
well may be
like
explanations. We just
0025, 0035.
let's sure.
Oh, that's sure.
Yeah. I do still think, Griffin, despite what you've said, because I agree with you there, I think there is still an element of like the random number generation kind of impressions that you get. Like you've just been to Can Jam. You know how wide the spread can go on this stuff. And
and look, it's not like I'm not saying that. It's just because like I agree with kind of the implicit assumption of this question, which is that the answer is yes, because audiophiles are not reliable.
Exactly.
But we have to remember that audiophiles are also the people taking measurements, and that measurements in both how they're taken and how they're displayed is extremely subjective, such that we should be less sure than we are.
Well, there's a question of whether it's literally us
sure.
or an individual, right? Like
Sure.
we're quite able to parse when someone has likely messed up a measurement to an extent that lay people are much less likely to be able to. But I guess conversely, someone who's not as versed is also less likely to realize that someone is absolutely wacko when they're doing a subjective review. So, it's just a minefield, honestly.
It is. In that respect, I kind of also I wanted to ask you this actually, Griffin. We have traditionally sort of like created a bit of a maybe even erroneous demarcation or delineation between like audiophile and then like what we're doing over here. But we are in the same we're in that brainworms bucket, right?
I feel like that's
the demarcation is a lie, right? Is what I'm saying here. And what I would love to consider is like if we were to do the like portrait of an audiophile as a young man thing for us. Okay. Okay. Let me back up. If we were to do the whole like what it's like to be an audiophile thing, we would give very different answers, for us compared to, let's say, the majority of Headphone. But I still don't think there's any difference in kind when it comes to the things that we actually enjoy about the products that we love. I think we just like, you know what I mean? Like there's, I still think
Like,
we are chasing the same kind of like this deeper sense of like, I've in the past called this resolution or whatever, right? Whatever the goodness is, the nugget of goodness that we've identified here in this hobby. I feel like we're all still chasing that. It's just that the particulars have moved around a little bit.
yeah, no, like I get what you're saying. It's a little bit tough to say it's exactly the same for two reasons. The first is that the big difference is that we're looking in different places, right? Like they're looking in the existing product market and looking for their perfect fit. We're looking into kind of what about the acoustic system works best for us.
I'm actually looking for a hype-based fit within the current market.
But the second thing is and I think to an extent we were like this and probably just aren't anymore due to being jaded, but I think they're looking for an experiential kind of thing, whether it's, hearing something novelly presented for the first time that way, or, something like that, where there's an element of novelty and kind of emotional engagement with how the product presents your music. And I don't necessarily think we're chasing that as much as, like, for lack of a better term, just not being upset.
Well, okay, so there is a sense in which for us our interest has transcended novelty to focus more on versatility, and in that, and with respect to that, I actually think that there are times when we are probably not having nearly as romantic experiences with this. I mean, that sounds weirdly dirty. What are we doing with these products? But you get what I mean. We're not having these as, like emotionally resonant experiences with these products. But I still feel like, like we are not any different from what we like. I mean, this is a mean thing to say, and I don't mean it to be, but like, let's say the skill issue crowd. But we're not. I don't think we're not any better. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I do agree with you that it's not a difference in kind. Like,
it's not a difference in
kind.
And
this is kind of the beauty of, like, music as a whole, is that if you're a person who loves music, there are literally limitless avenues you can go down to enjoy music, whether it's creation, the consumption, or just being around it, or being around the people in music, or one of music's many fields.
I did something the other day. I have to tell you guys about this. I was in my living room. I had my speakers, and I put on a video about it was a documentary video about a specific kind of desert cat. It's a small cat in the desert, and they were doing this documentary about this.
Were they Namibian desert cats? I fucking love those things.
Yeah, I think it was one of those. It was just looked super cool. So and they had these really cool like shots of it at night and everything, right? So I put that on my screen, and I muted it, and I played Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata in its entirety over my speakers, and it worked so well with these crazy shots of this cat, going through whatever it was doing at night. And I thought, this is a way to enjoy music that I never thought, like, and it was totally by accident that I did this. I was just like, oh, because I happened to be listening to Beethoven, and I, just turned on my speakers, and then that was what was playing, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna do this now. And it was a kind of enjoyment that I haven't had that in a while. It was a novelty, but it was one that I really, really enjoy.
I frequently listen to music while watching videos of cats.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, music videos are a thing, but I feel like they rarely take such
I'm not talking about Doja Cat when I'm talking about cats.
No, I know, but
I still don't know who that is.
Yeah, I would not be able to identify who this person is.
I just mean, like, video accompaniment to audio is not a new thing, but
Rob says that's called grunching.
What's that?
Rob says that's called grunching. I don't know what that's
reading.
Oh, I recently realized found out who Dua Lipa is. Apparently, she's an Albanian nationalist.
Is that a good thing?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
She wants to conquer Kosovo.
Nationalist? Is that the word we're going to use?
Well, apparently she tweeted a picture of Greater Albania, which would involve them conquering territory from multiple of their neighbors. So,
but was that intentional?
Who could mistake the borders of Albania?
They are pretty bitter towards Serbia, I will say.
Well, yeah, but it'd be Kosovo that get fucked. Unless you're on the Kosovo to Serbia.
I could have sworn Dua Lipa was from
Guys,
Kosovo.
is my audio still borked, or am I still clipping?
You sound fine on ping.
That they're some sort of Albanian. They may be Kosovar or Albanian. I don't know. All I know is that they caused great international upset by tweeting a picture of a imperialist Albania conquering its neighbors.
Okay.
Did not
as a former Canadian, this is upsetting.
Former.
Well, as a resident of the country formerly known as Canada, this is upsetting to me.
The 51st state now, isn't
it? Yeah. Anyway, I forgot where we were at. Should we move on? Next topic.
What do you guys think? Anything else to say about trusting imperfect measurements more or less than audio files?
Just don't trust anybody.
Don't trust anybody, even yourself.
Yeah.
Literally, yes.
Yeah. On those comforting words, let's move on to Blend Talk Data Dive.
Yeah. So this one is we were just at Can Jam, and I feel like Blaine's most recent newest talk had a lot of things that I feel like, obviously, like I was there for Blaine actively unpacking a lot of this stuff, so it's not necessarily news to me, but I feel like a lot of the data would be helpful for other people.
I mean, most of it is not super novel. Like a lot of it is a rehash of these are the dark ages in terms of headphones don't measure sames on different heads. Headphone measurements vary based on a whole bunch of factors, et cetera, et cetera. The Harman stuff, I think, is the interesting new stuff.
Yeah, and if we're okay to, I would like to talk about that. And
yeah.
So people can.
So I still have it on video. Like I could upload it from just my shitty.
Hold on, we also have it on the camcorder. So we'll put that together and we will put it on the channel and we will put it on a link to it on the forum.
Yeah. Also, by the way, let me know if I could help with that. Like I just
need the slides from Blaine so I can put the.
Oh, I can just send those. That's trivial.
Well, just because I put them in the video and then we can see them easier rather than having to. Yeah, because otherwise you kind of got to look, squint at the screen and try and get the exposure right for the screen. It's hard to read. But yeah, the gist of your talk, or at least what I took from it, is it says occasionally clicks, nothing major.
Yeah, no, I have been hearing little clicks.
Okay,
little only in high frequency clicks.
Yeah, they're transients.
But so talking about kind of where the second talk, I think, starts to get, novel and interesting and contain things that other people may not have seen. I guess we should start from.
Okay, wait, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we should start from kind of, for those who haven't read it, the kind of conclusion that is presented by the paper of like the 2018 study, like as far as how that is supported or.
And when you say the 2018 study, you mean a statistical model that predicts listener preferences for. Okay. Say more about what you're talking about, because there's a few slides that we could be thinking about here.
Right. So for those who aren't aware, that study basically entailed Sean taking, or I don't know who took the measurements, but Harman taking measurements on their Gross 45 CA equipped with their custom pinna of a bunch of headphones, and then EQing all of those headphones on people.
EQing a K712 into all those headphones.
EQing a K712 to replicate the responses of those headphones as measured on that Welty ear. They additionally EQ'd it to the Harman target, the 2018 target I think all of us are familiar with, and they kind of did comparison listening tests so people could kind of score them based on their preference. And one of the more interesting things that I think we found, or that Blaine found, is that the conclusion of the Harman target is preferred is not the only conclusion that could be drawn from that data.
There's a number of interesting things. Obviously, Olive and Kansarapur and Welty reanalyzed their data in segmentation of listeners based on their preferred headphone sound quality profile or whatever. But at physical expense, I'm not sure if you can hear the sound my wrist makes when I do that, but it's a crack. I manually scraped every single data point from actually both of those fucking papers, which allowed me to look at some of the underlying data and come to conclusions that don't entirely match the papers.
With the conclusions being?
Well, quite a few of them, actually. Probably the most significant from my point of view, well, actually it depends. The one that I was actually the most excited about going into CanJam was the fact that Sean was wrong that people don't prefer the Harman target. Like, his thing has always been, 64% of people prefer Harman. Yeah. But if you actually look at the underlying data, the people who didn't prefer Harman actually liked Harman overwhelmingly more than everything else. It's just that they fucking hated everything else, and the pattern of the stuff that they hated less was weird.
Yes.
Actually,
that is a very interesting conclusion.
Is it possible to bring up my PowerPoint on stream?
Do you want to send it to me?
Yeah, I dropped it in general.
As long as it doesn't mess with the stream, like your bandwidth there.
I mean, I don't have PowerPoint proper, but I'm wondering if I could just kind of like preview it in
like Google
Apple
Sheet. Well, if you put it into Google Drive, it should be able to open there.
Oh, yeah, let me try.
I can save it as a PNG. I don't even want to know what that results.
What is?
You mainly just want that one.
The Google equivalent of? Because it's not Sheets, right? It's something else.
No, it's like Deck or whatever. I don't know what the.
Yeah.
Slides.
There we go.
Whilst you guys are getting that up, slight tangent. I got an email from Microsoft yesterday telling me that Microsoft Publisher is no longer going to be included in Office and you should use Word instead. Which, why? Anyway, that annoyed me. Just wanted to mention that.
I mean, that's
because anyone who tried to move an image in Word knows how terrible that is.
It sucks.
I mean, okay, to be fair, you shouldn't be using Word for anything that has images pretty much as like a period. It's just not good.
But like that's why I used Publisher, and now they're saying, "Oh, just use Word instead." It's like it's not a substitute.
Well, they're saying pay us more.
Yeah, it's like I'm already paying for the full Office 365. Anyway, sorry, that was a tangent, but it's like why?
Because Microsoft can and will squeeze every drop of blood out of a stone.
I'll just switch to using the Google stuff instead. I'll just cancel my Microsoft thing. So
you say that, but you always come back because the Google stuff kind of sucks.
And well, it's only Sheets that sucks versus versus Excel. Yeah.
So I'm having a little bit of trouble uploading it. I'm gonna see if I can.
Blaine, do you want to just like go through what it is that you're talking about? Maybe we can talk about as Griffin is working on this.
Right. So I'm just gonna try a little. So oh dear God. Welp. I've just made a terrible mistake.
Okay.
I just exported this as PNGs, and I think it just created like 60 PNGs in my fucking My downloads folder. God damn it.
Oh no. Okay. And on that terrible disappointment, the world is going to end.
Yeah. I mean, it really has shitted up
one.
my downloads, though. So basically, this talk was originally titled "What Everyone Gets Wrong About the Harman Target," but then I realized, you know what? I should probably have a less esoteric talk than These Are the Dark Ages that talks about like headphones vary and people interact with headphones differently and stuff. So I threw that stuff on in front. Did my usual whole, you can measure a headphone with noise, music, sine sweeps, etc. They're all the fucking same bit. I will keep doing that bit because people still keep asking me about that at shows, and it's really just slowly killing my will to live.
Well, that's also just like the most common misunderstanding of anything to do with headphone data.
Yeah, it's weird to me that so many people assume that if that was the case, we would still use frequency response measurements from sweeps. Like it's sort of it feels like a sort of assumption of incompetence that I just don't get.
There's a parallel to this in imaging, like so photography and stuff like that, where people get mad when reviewers test lenses and lens performance, so things like vignetting and whatever else, by taking photos of brick walls that reveals the vignetting, right? And they get mad because they say no photographer would ever use this to take photos of brick walls. But like that's the dumbest argument ever, because the point is not to use that as the supplement for the art that might get created. It's to indicate how this piece of equipment might be used and its potential downsides that you would actually notice when you were using this tool for whatever it is that you're creating.
So what we've really learned is that we should just never ever produce content for the masses, and that actually we should stay secluded in our ivory towers.
I think I've got it kind of working.
Okay.
Hell yeah.
So
yeah. Just go to like slide 20.
Okay, I think I can do that.
Boris's take is quite good. These are the bright ages, so bright that DT990 is top of the chart.
That's the outcome.
Well, no, it's not actually. The Fidelio X1 was top.
God.
Correct. Chat, can you see this?
How the fuck did that mess up the formatting of my chart?
Yeah, I'm not looking at it in PowerPoint. So this is just like the Mac preview feature.
This is
terrible. Terrible.
Yeah, hold on. Did the rest of them get screwed up, or is that better? Or
these are things we should have considered beforehand.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about the one that's untrained listeners versus trained listeners, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I'll just throw the PNG in here. Hold on.
Sorry.
Well, it's up there. It's up there. You can read it.
Well, you can't read the names, which actually was. I mean, it's not important, but
I would say that's part of the info that makes it interesting to people.
Yeah.
It's certainly what made it interesting to me.
And I'll grab slide 21 as well, so you can zoom in on that one.
Please. And thank you.
So this is the actual preferences. Well, rather, this is the median, sorry, the mean preferences of the trained and untrained listener groups relative to the Harman target.
Griffin.
Huh? Yep. No, it should be up now.
Don't see it.
I also don't see it.
Sorry. Now?
Nope.
I'll be back in one second.
Oh, now it is. Now it is.
Okay.
Sick.
Okay, so do you want? I'm gonna move to the zoom in one.
Yeah.
Here.
So this I was actually bringing out in the talk just to reinforce that, and you hear this one a lot. Trained listeners have different preferences than untrained listeners. Technically true, but if you look, the correlation is very high, right? There are a few things where they go in a little bit different directions. The Grado SR 325E and the DT990 are two examples thereof. But for almost everything else, they track very closely. Right? So this is just one that I wanted to throw in there because I think most people watching know that trained listener preferences are pretty similar to just everyone's preferences, but some people sadly don't. The one that Aya said considered to be more meaty was slides 23/24, which is the so-called segments. So the segment, yes.
Segments.
So true.
So true. So true, bestie.
So this is slide 23?
Yes. Well, slides 23, 24, and 25 are all basically on this topic.
Okay.
So the upshot that, and we have parroted this, so my bad.
Our bad.
The graph periodic. Oh, actually, Pianette, the reason the graph is periodic is because that's the order that they were tested in, and they were tested in groups of 6. So it always will peak up because the first one in the ordering, just because of how Sean did it, is the one that had the highest score for that group. So there is actually periodicity there. Anyway, so this one, I removed some of that by just putting it on the sort of how highly people rated it. The argument here that you hear is, there's the 64% who are class 1 listeners. They just really love the Harman target and they have very conventional preferences. And then there's the class 2s who like less treble and the class 3s who like less treble and the class 2s who like more bass. But the problem is when I looked closely at the actual preferences of those two classes, what seems to me to be the case is that class 3 listeners are just highly inconsistent, which makes sense. They're an untrained sample. And though you can't see it here, the standard deviations of all their ratings were much higher. But they still correlate quite well with class 1, which makes sense because untrained listeners correlate quite well with trained listeners. And then there's class 2 who are just really, really mad.
Yeah, and by really mad, you mean rating everything significantly lower than both parties, barring a few outliers.
Yeah, and that one I didn't have the names in. I regret that. That was just an artifact of not being fast enough. Headphone 24 is the Beats Solo 2.
So it's just they only indexed for bass.
Well, no, but the thing is, they basically only indexed for Harman, right? Harman substantially outscores the Solo 2, particularly because they have such a compressed rating scale.
Well, hold on. What was Headphone 22?
Headphone 22?
Yeah.
I believe that was the Grado SR 325.
They indexed for bass.
Well, no, so Jesus Christ, that's bright on your screen. So you say that, but again, these guys basically, again, with the exception of the Solo, rated everything 10 plus points lower than Harman, which is massive because their whole rating scale was from 55-ish to on average to
I get what you're saying. It's that they were having a bad day.
Right? Well, it's not even that.
With exception,
they still preferred Harman strongly. And that's something that I think is sort of the interesting conclusion here, is that Harman overwhelmingly dominates even among the people who supposedly want more bass than Harman. The reason that we end up with those 3 curves and those...
I do get why Sean would have parsed this the way that they would have parsed this the way that they did, because of situations like Headphone 24 where others would have rated it lower,
so there is variation in what FR features correlated with preference, right?
Yeah.
But what there wasn't variance in was rating Harman really, really high.
For sure, and that's not the thing that is typically
Harman
taken
wasn't
from
a
this.
statistical tie for best.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah.
For classes 1 and 2, Harman isn't even a statistical tie, really. Well, actually, for class 1, there's a couple of things that are statistical tie. For class 2, there is nothing that is a statistical tie with Harman. It's literally just They thought Harman was good, the beats were tolerable, and then everything else is dog shit.
Yeah. Class 3 is the interesting one here to me.
Class 3 is very noisy. Like,
Yeah.
Class 3 is the smallest group, I believe.
Yeah.
It's comprised entirely of untrained listeners,
Mhm.
and the error bars on all the values there are meaningfully larger than any of the other ones.
Yeah, like
That's why Harman.
you don't see it on this graph, but each one of these points actually represents a fairly wide range when compared to, say,
Sure.
segment 1, who's a little bit more consistent.
Sure. But what strikes me as interesting is that both of these, like, there is a pattern here to a certain extreme, even though it is noisier. Headphone 24 being one of the least preferred for that group versus segment, well, particularly class 2, is at least an indication of base level preference differences. And then that can have a
and there's a
meaningful
few
influence.
things where the two inversely correlate, right?
Yeah,
Like, there's
yeah.
Headphone 21, Headphone 22, as you said, Headphone 6. In all these cases, there's an inverse correlation of classes 2 and 3. So I mean, this is why the segmentation analysis that Sean did spit these things out.
Yeah.
Where I think it all went wrong, though, is in the thing that I showed in slide 25, which is that he took the average response of the most and least preferred headphones for each group. Which
So that's the part
problem
on the right here.
Yes. So the problem with that is that for several of them, there are more than 5 headphones that, well, for class 3, there are more than 5 headphones that are a statistical tie for best. And conversely, for class 2, there is nothing that even comes close to tying the Harman target. And the nearest thing is the Beats, which is massively ahead of the next thing below that. So you end up with this thing where it's like, oh man, people in class 2 want a ton of bass, but actually they hated all those headphones. They just hated them less than some of the other ones.
But that is still, I mean, to me, there's still something to the fact that Harman is a reasonable, like it's just sort of a generally reasonable shape for much of it. But the key thing that it has over many of those other headphones is bass.
All of them, over all of them. It has more bass under like 70
even more than the
hertz
Beats,
than any of the headphones by a significant margin.
Even more than the Beats.
Yeah, to be clear, not more than the headphones, but more than the simulated responses based on the measurements they took of those headphones on the Welty rig.
Yeah, so to me, that's still the indicative factor, or the leading factor, I should say.
Well, we don't know. Like, we don't know how much that specific feature caused a preference.
Indeed. All that we can tell for sure from this is that the Harman target was very, very well liked, right?
Yes.
Which, I mean, obviously is not a surprising result, but it's one where even the way that we framed it before, and this is because we basically took Sean's interpretation.
His outcome,
is that there's a much wider variation in preference than can be indicated from that.
I guess there are... To me, the big thing is I can just, from this, is I can still very much understand why Sean and co framed it that way, or basically I can understand why they got to the outcomes that they did.
It's really figure 6 is the problem. Everything else there is quite good in segmentation, but because of the process of averaging together the top and bottom 5 arbitrarily, you end up with something that is pretty misleading, particularly with regards to class 2, as said.
Yeah.
And I mean, also it's highly sensitive to the headphone models used, but
it
doesn't really super matter.
And so something I'm just going to go back to the last slide really quick. Something that wasn't made abundantly clear to me when reading this paper for the first time, but was made more apparent when kind of being a backseat observer to your deep dive on this data was for certain segments or certain groups of people, how many things are basically just statistically tied for preference with Harman. Now, obviously, it depends on kind of the robustness of the data of each segment, and as you said, like segment 3 is rather noisy. But even in segment 1, based on what we know about the limits of the Harman model and kind of the the error bars for the scores being kind of roughly 7 or 8 or something like that. Like there are a good number of headphones that are preferred equally to Harman in this study, and they don't really look like Harman.
Yep. This is particularly true if you extend the boundary of statistical ties, right? And this is something I talked to Sean a bit about, right? He sometimes uses a definition where the mean score is within the so where there's an overlap of the 95%.
I didn't see any of this. Sorry, I'm adding all of it now.
No, it's all good. Where there's an overlap of the 95% confidence intervals, I tend to say that we should extract the standard deviation from that data and then see where they're within an overlap of 1 STDev. But if you extend it further to say 2 STDev, which would cover actually the majority, like would cover 95% of the population, you end up with even more things that are tied to Harman, right? And indeed, you end up with something that's more like what the untrained listeners said, because largely it's their ratings which were driving things to tie with Harman.
Yeah.
The trained listeners were very pro Harman to an extent that was significantly different than everyone else.
Yeah, so
good question, Rob. This probably would be different under communism.
Yeah.
Wait, what?
Rob asks the most salient question, which is, would this be different under communism?
So yeah, just kind of, I wanted to show this to people because it is one of the funnier, I think, conclusions from all of this. Which slide is it? This slide, the one with
oh yes,
I love this slide so much, actually.
I also love this slide.
I know you love this slide. But yeah, if you want to kind of explain to people, like I already kind of gestured towards it, but
so consistently when people evaluate headphones, I see this take where if a headphone can't match Harman throughout the whole range, people assume that it's best that it generally match Harman. So for example, that it match it from 1K or from 500 hertz up, even if it doesn't have the right bass. And that's sort of an unquestioned assumption that will be better because, it's more correlated with Harman.
The more correlation, the more better.
Yes, exactly. But here's the problem. We have direct counter evidence to that. The HD800S in the Harman listening test clearly does not correlate as well with Harman as the HD600 does, right?
Yeah, but these people
just scores meaningfully better.
Yeah, but these people just have bad taste.
That's a bad
take,
though.
Checkmate.
These 128 people had bad taste.
No, because we don't know. Like, so for example, we don't know what features are kind of resulting in the preference people showed, but we do see, at least with the Welty ear, that the HD650 has a pretty cavernous dip in kind of the mid treble area.
Well, this is one of the key scrungles with all of this, which is that we're not able to actually, we don't know necessarily how this stuff would measure. Well, I'm not aware of what the HPTF variation effects would be for that headphone specifically, and how closely that would match what is actually going on.
I mean, so actually, that's one of the only headphones we have data. Like these two headphones are basically the two headphones we have data for on that.
No, I'm that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying the differences between the K712 versus the whatever the simulated headphone happens to be on that ear.
Well, no, we do have that difference. Like they measured the K712 on that ear as well, because that's what they used to virtualize.
Did they also measure the headphones that were being? I guess they would have, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I mean that. Yeah, yes. we have all of the responses, and we have for the HD650 in particular. Like we have an inkling of how that measurement you see would correlate to humans, and honestly, it correlates more closely than any of the other rigs we use.
Okay, so to be fair, that data set is imperfect.
Oh, in many ways. Like the fact that you don't see bass extension on any of the headphones down to, even like 30 hertz, like even the closed back headphones, does to me say that the headphone measurements themselves probably could have been conducted with a bit more care. And I also don't know if these are averages of multiple seatings or not.
Hold on.
Are, yes.
So RS says, okay, let's not pay attention to the treble because all of them are EQ from the K712 based on gross measurement. This is
so yes. I mean, that is absolutely true. But what I meant by that is that there is an inkling that this kind of feature we're seeing does actually show up on people's heads with the HD650. Not all of them, but some people do experience a dip like that.
Yeah, and this is sort of orthogonal to the point I was making, because it said, if you do regress them, you'll find that the R value is meaningfully higher for the HD 600 than it is for the HD 800. Basically the goal of that whole slide was to say, hey, we're all saying, oh, if you can't have the full Lamborghini, you may as well have the front tires. But as it turns out, that's often worse than having something that is actually fully adapted to its limitations.
This was kind of my issue with the HD 560S.
Yeah, I mean, it's something where I get where people are coming from with it. Intuitively, it's where my brain went first. But then when I looked at the data, I don't think it's actually nearly as strongly supported as we would have thought.
I don't know. I think the idea, though, that people people will approach this with, even if they're not doing the more closer to Harman, more better thing, there is still something to the earlier slide that you put here that is, it was still the most preferred, or it was still the thing that was ranked the highest. So even if they had other preferences for these things too that were very different, and so like there's an element of like practicality to EQing things to Harman that I think people are not wrong necessarily for doing.
Oh no, EQing things to Harman in totality is not at all a bad idea.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a starting point.
Because you can say there at the very, like, you can say in light of something like this, right? You can say, well, there are many other preferences that are going to be that are going to perform. There are many other tunings that will be similarly preferred, but at least we know this one is, So it's kind of like there's a whole bunch of.
Oris is talking to me, but he says he thinks that one of us puts too much emphasis on people carrying above 7K. Nothing I'm talking about is about 7K. Like the differences I was talking about there are in the ear gain region.
We know that, well, we talk a lot about how shit varies like crazy above like 3K even. I don't even know why we split hairs above 7K.
Yeah, I don't really get where that one was going. I wanted to say there is, as you can see, there's another. I just pulled another headphone pair where I had an even more overwhelming difference of correlation, right? One of those is a Bose Quiet Comfort. One of those is an Oppo PM1, I think.
Yeah.
And it's trivial which one is closer to Harman, and that one got fucking demolished for score. So it's like,
but then again, there's the question of is that difference in score and preference because of, I mean, it doesn't go against the conclusion, but like, for example, that's got a pretty substantial 3 kilohertz peak you can see on one of them. And so is that going to therefore override any other sort of, like, it is the presence of one clear narrower band potentially delta from the Harman target going to override the differences, and still therefore the conclusion of generally closer is better could still remain true otherwise?
Well, I mean, there are other closer. Like if
there are other headphones that have a similar like boost above 3K of Harman that were like equally preferred to Harman, like both the 7506 and I want to say the DT990 and the SRH 840 all had more ear gain than Harman, but were all roughly equally preferred.
2 posts up in the server if you don't have it already.
Oh, okay.
that has that plot. So we know for a fact.
One with all the headphones. Yeah, no, I do have it.
Yeah, all the headphones that tied or beat Harman.
Yeah.
So these are the statistical ties with Harman. And again, these models were extracted. Sean wouldn't tell me them even after I gave him a bunch of wine. But
yeah, Blaine and I had to manually just like
you didn't do this
the
after
entire
he
internet
consumed the wine.
No, he wouldn't give me shit. I had to do all of this manually, and then like look very closely at KB 0065 measurements of all these headphones.
I don't necessarily know if there's like a reason to do like the close reading explanation of this, other than to just say like, yeah, like,
well, the explanation of this is that there's that close reading.
That is for sure 100%. But I'm just saying, if you look at this, there's a sense in which a reasonable target is likely to be preferred. Period.
Yeah.
Done. Like there's no
but apparently all four of those are a reasonable target,
which is pretty wide if you think about it.
Yeah.
And this also tracks not exactly, but it tracks similarly with some of the outcomes that we've sort of gleaned from the more recent IEM research, which is well, the surprising things to me, at least, from that were that two very different targets were similarly preferred by the same people. That to me is the striking thing.
And I mean, we see the same thing if we look back at the data from preference, where, I mean, it's particularly true of the untrained group, but for all of them that aren't class 2, there were things that were meaningfully different to Harman that were still preferred equally to Harman.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas class 2 was, ironically, he was like, the more base is better, but really he should have called them Harman purists, or if not that, base.
Yeah, they sort of have a hierarchy of things they care about.
Let's see. Right. The last thing was on the note of variation. Someone in chat asked if it was normal to find Harman to be dark, and this is several slides up now. I'll just throw them in again so that they're easily accessed.
Please and thank you.
So this was just because I could easily get the data for a bunch of listeners. I just took the data from the original Harman experiment, so it's only 13 people. But something that I've never seen done before was plotting the values from the table. If you can just go back one slide. No.
Yeah.
So that table has the values of preferred bass and treble. Oh my God. The values of preferred bass and treble level on a listener basis. Not that one.
You were just there.
The problem is we're trying to guide him based on the stream, and the stream lags.
Yeah, the 2013 one.
Yes.
Got it.
So we've all presumably, or at least those of us who've read the paper, have seen the little plot of both the preferred levels for bass and treble by headphone and loudspeaker, and there's also they're actually tiny little box plots because they do have 95% CIs. So they're pretty tight. Like we can be pretty confident this is the levels people liked. And again, it's a small sample of people, but it's not even 13 people. I don't even remember how many. 1, 2, 3.
I think it's 10.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, 10. I was thinking of the IEM experiment, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But what I hadn't seen done was plotting those as the spread of actual preferred FRs. So first I did that with just the shelf filters, right? And then I applied those shelf filters to the in-room flat headphone, to the headphone as it was equalized in that experiment.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the range of responses that we actually got. And you can't see this super well because it's still a fairly large number of them, but they range from significantly less treble and upper mids and no bass boost at all to mild bass boost and a little bit less treble and upper mids to one guy even boosted the treble from what was basically DF, but also cranked up the bass. And all of these are part of the data set that informs the average. Now, we know from subsequent work that average does score well, but it's interesting to see how varied people get when you actually allow them to adjust things to their preference. Like there are people for whom Harman is massively too bassy, and simultaneously that it's meaningfully too shouty. And that's something I've heard people say, right? Like that is a complaint I've heard.
Yeah.
So I liked this one a lot.
Yeah.
Except for a green guy. The guy who did plus 14 dB bass is not going to heaven.
There's still
it's not going
there's
to
still
just by beats. Just by beats, you'll be fine.
There's still something weird to me about the HPTF element and the fact that this is the replicator headphone versus
so for this one it's HD 800 and it's measured on the 006 ear for anyone who doesn't know that.
But you get why I'm identifying this as like a
not really.
Well, okay, and maybe there's no reason to, but to me there's something unknown about what people are necessarily selecting for when they are making these attributions of goodness or wanting more bass or wanting more treble. Does that make sense at all?
How much of the selection of broader tonal differences is actually being driven by more narrow HP?
That's kind of what I'm thinking. Like, I mean, we're talking up here. So with the K712 example, we're talking about. Well, actually, in all the examples, we're talking about the Welty pinna, right?
Mm-hmm.
No,
we're not.
No, not in this one. This
one is only in the 2018 paper.
In
2013 and 2015 are both with the 0071.
I thought you said 6.5 for the.
Well, it's the same. It's the same thing. Yeah. One's for the Kemar, one's for the 45CA.
So for the packing result.
Yeah, for the HD800, it doesn't matter because the HD800 doesn't touch the pinna, so the durometer doesn't matter.
Oh, I see. I got you. Yeah, right. But the geometry would be the same.
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
So I guess the thing though is that there's a quite strong correlation of how much treble people wanted and how much bass people wanted, and it's inverse, right? Like people who wanted more bass wanted. Sorry, it's linear. Sorry, it's direct. It's people wanted more bass, wanted more treble. People who wanted less treble wanted less bass. And there was variation within that, but that variation was actually meaningfully less than the variation of the individual filters, right?
So, okay, right. But when we're testing, or when they were testing these responses on individuals, right? And then trying to, because they're doing this with the replicator headphone, we didn't get the FR at their eardrums.
No, but we do see that there's a quite substantial correlation with loudspeaker preferences.
Okay, sure. But what I guess what I'm saying is that, like, how would we know that the end result of the replicator headphone is behaving similarly as to the headphone that it is trying to replicate at the eardrums of those individual people?
Well,
like, maybe this doesn't matter.
We have similarly. Like, we can absolutely say that in the bass it will be within probably 3 dB, right? Like that's a level of variation.
I'm less concerned about the bass, more the stuff above 3 kilohertz.
Okay, but the stuff above 3 kilohertz we can objectively show has a much lower effect on people's preferences. Like particularly narrow band stuff is less audible. It's not to say that it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But it's not going to be the stuff that swings big scores. Because if it were, people would be much less consistent in preferring headphones that frankly cannot possibly match the HRTF of large ranges of people.
Yeah. But say, for example, you had a situation where you're using a K712, you're replicating, pick a bright headphone, but the way that bright headphone A, but the way that a person's ear is affecting the behavior of the K712 is making it so that response is meaningfully darker at their eardrum. But then you measure the K712 on the Welty pinna and it shows a much brighter response. The conclusion there is, well, this person liked a much brighter response.
Yeah, you're asking if there is a deterministic error in this from the nuisance variable of how the 712 interacts with people's pinna. Now, mind you, that doesn't apply to these. That would apply to the prior thing and how things were tying with things. And I suspect that this whole thing is an extension of the cope because you really don't want the DT990 to have scored really well in preference.
No, but okay, the DT990 is just one example. It happens to be a particularly bright example. Also, I don't know how much this actually relates to the DT990, given that The DT990 also varies a lot. I'm thinking
yeah,
just
but
generally.
It's not about the headphone, the DT990. It's that a headphone with the
with
death
that,
spike
I get what you're saying. With
preferred.
that, well, yes, a headphone with the death spike on the Welty pinna was preferred, but we don't know if the death spike is the thing that's actually preferred.
The thing is, like, a lot of headphones have a spike on that ear, except for the Harman target.
So Yan in chat asks, what SPL was the test done at? Good question. Varies by the test. There were, I think, in total, 9 listening tests now across Harman. Some of them, listeners were given the ability to adjust the volume. Some of them, it was fixed at a level like an RMS level of 83 dB, for example. So in some of them, they could adjust, and some of them they couldn't. When they could adjust, it did not substantially change results.
So, Griffin, what you just said, though, a lot of headphones on that ear have the death spike, where Harman doesn't. Is this not just... Isn't this not just reinforcing exactly that problem, though?
I don't think anyone is saying that problem doesn't exist in terms of how you treat the data from that paper above 3 kilohertz. I think,
but I guess what I'm saying is, in practice, when people are wearing any of these headphones, they're getting a variation of a response, some of which may include the death spike. But we can't, it feels weird to say, yeah, this kind of response was preferred, when we don't actually know that's what the response actually was.
Well, yeah, that's
I guess
why...
another way of sort of putting it would be, what would the conclusions of the research be if you redid it, but had a way of then, effectively measuring at the listener's eardrum rather than
controlling at the eardrum.
To my mind, it would be pretty easy to replicate.
Differ.
We already have the responses of the K712 as well as the other headphones on the rig, which gives us the EQ profiles or the difference curves that we would use to, if we wanted to do this test again on people, like with the K712, we would put a K712 on their head and then use difference curve to DT990 and then get there.
Which incidentally, we can do at least for one of us.
Well,
soon.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're
gonna do.
We can do this. We can replicate this. But I think I understand kind of the issue you're bringing up in the treble, but there is a legitimate argument that we would not want to tie any of our analysis to the specific interactions of that headphone on that head.
Well, I mean,
but we don't have the data.
We don't have anything nearly sufficient to allow that kind of fine-grained analysis, to be frank. That's sort of the whole point. We have a body of headphones that tied with Harman, which have highly heterogeneous FRs. They do have consistency in the relationship of their bass and treble, which is, I think, probably the most
salient bit of the whole. Yeah, I would agree.
And that's reaffirmed by the preferences when they had method of adjustment, right? Some people will like less treble, but those who like less treble like less bass.
And as Griffin points out, actually, that might be proportional bass and ear gain, not just bass and treble, depending on where we put it.
The ear gain is a large share of people's perception of treble, frankly speaking.
Yeah. Anyway, okay. I still have scrungles with all of it, but...
Well, yeah, I'm not sure I quite get what the scrungles are about, though, because nobody's claiming that this is perfectly predictive.
Yeah, that's fair. Also, the outcome here is not one that I disagree with. So, let's should we move on?
Yeah.
Sure.
So for folks, that talk will hopefully be available soon. Once we have a chance to edit it, I'll try and have this up next week.
If you want, I can also take a crack at that because it should be pretty simple, right?
Maybe.
I can't believe our viewership went up during that.
Yeah, I was just saying if you want to take things off your plate, no big deal if not.
Well, we'll talk about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So moving on from here, are there any other CanJam things you guys want to talk about?
I want to talk about the Cranier stuff. No, not the Cranier. Well, there's the Cranier stuff, but there's also the new 02 Blue.
Oh yeah, I left that in the other room. I do have that.
We were going to talk about that a bit. So did you publish your article yet on that?
No, I was waiting for you to look at the changes I made last night.
Okay.
They are notable. So, I mean, I guess I could give kind of like a brief kind of
Harman plus.
Harman minus. So no, I mean, so the thing that I think the main thing people need to know about this IEM is that you have to use foam tips. Like, if you do not use foam tips, you are getting a frankly ridiculous treble boost above 8 kilohertz. That is, yeah, just I don't see a market for that kind of sound for anyone other than the people who want a ton of upper treble, which this market does exist. I am not one of them. When you listen with foam tips, it is, a more typical Harman IEM. So it's not terrible by any means. The bass is very prominent and bouncy and boomy. The mids are a little bit thin and, glary, and the treble is, a little bit forward in the 5 to 7 kilohertz region for me. Not crazily so, but definitely notable. And then with the foam tips, I also get a little bit too much like 10 kilohertz area as well. It's not nearly as bad as with the silicone tips, but it is still not quite ideal for me. If anything, kind of the bigger disappointment was that when Kryn was first telling me about this IEM, he said like one of the first things he wanted to focus on was the nozzle dimensions and all that, and he did make it significantly smaller, but it's still kind of on the wide side and definitely on the longer side of nozzles.
So
and
the way it kind of your ear.
I wouldn't say it gapes your ear necessarily, but I would say kind of the angling and length of the nozzle and how it kind of cascades into the shell proper, for lack of a better term, is just less than ideal. Like, it just doesn't fit the angling of my ear. It just doesn't feel good. Like, the shell kind of sticks out a little bit too much, and it just kind of feels insecure.
What's funny about that is I'm somebody who typically has trouble with exactly what you're describing about the cadence of the angle.
But with short nozzles?
Yeah, well, just generally.
Oh, okay.
Like, even, yeah. But the red and the blue, like the originals, which were even thicker, I never had issues with those. Weirdly.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. Like, the red is one of those, like the 0 and 0 red are one of those headphones or IEMs that have just been recommended so goddamn much over the last year that, I feel like people take the criticisms of it maybe a little less seriously than they would just because it is so ubiquitous and it is so, just like it's such a normal option these days. But I will say, like, after using the new one, which is like marginally, but not totally improved in ergonomics, I do kind of feel like we probably should have been a little bit more vocal about the ergonomics in the past being bad and kind of more specific about what about it was wrong. Because I think we all kind of defaulted to the width of the nozzle, but I think there were a lot of other problems.
See, width of the nozzle wasn't an issue for me with that one.
Yeah, definitely was for me, but not as much as the length and kind of the overall molding of the shell. Yeah. But anyway, back to the IEM itself. I really don't like foam tips, and this is kind of where a lot of my review is centered. Is just kind of like how unhappy I am with the fact that I have to use foam tips to get a response I still don't really like. I just feel like for either if you are like a Harman adherent person, you really want a Harman target tuned IEM, there are better options for that are, more ergonomic, less expensive, actually are closer to Harman. Or if you want something that just sounds good, I also think there are better options for that are less expensive, more ergonomic. So I kind of have the unfortunate place of like not really having any real reason to recommend the Zero Blue 2 to someone unless they specifically want more bass than Harman and more treble than Harman.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, even for people who like Harman or think they like Harman and want to buy a Harman tuned IEM, this is not necessarily the most Harman. There are closer things. Yeah.
Yeah, and importantly, it's if you are that person, there are closer things to Harman, but also there are things that are closer to Harman that are more comfortable, and things that are closer to Harman and less expensive.
Yeah.
So,
I don't know, man. For me, the bigger thing there is still just how like what an absolute clang fiesta that sound signature is. Like,
I mean, with the foam tips, it's like meaningfully different. Like it does
I didn't
both
use
dampen
foam tips
above
at Tangent, by the
8K
way.
and like damp the length mode. Wait, you tried it with foam tips?
No, I did not use foam tips at CanJam.
Yeah, I mean the difference is pretty dramatic.
Huge. Yeah,
I would say the signature with silicone is only for people who are like crazy treble heads.
Sorry, yeah, we're talking about Harman IE. That's the tuning that it is. Although I should also note Harman IE. I imagine if Sean had his druthers, that would also then there would be the next iteration of Harman IE based on the additional IEM research that he's been doing. It's just that we use 2019 because that's like the official published one. He's done.
I'm not sure that's true. I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, he literally said in his presentation that he thinks that it should be adjusted.
Wait, this past CanJam?
Yeah. No, not this. At SoCal, when he gave the MOA and the IE research presentation.
I could be misremembering, but I feel like he seemed pretty. I don't want to say unsure, but
so the paper itself concludes weirdly that despite the new tools and techniques, despite the new standard with the 5 and 2/8, Harman still ranks well. It was basically Harman is still okay.
Yeah.
But which is that's not the conclusion that I would have drawn from the research. But what he said when he was giving the talk specifically was maybe we need to adjust the treble here based on these results for the Harman target. And so to me, it's like I imagine if he were to continue to do the research, he would, or if he were to continue to work on this again, this is stuff that is out of his own, the goodness of his heart that he is doing this in many ways, right? There's no functional need necessarily for them to continue to do this research. I imagine he would want to update it for 2025.
I see a corgi like 2 floors down in the parking lot, like off a leash with his owner, and yo, this corgi, let me tell you, that is a cute baby.
We went
but yeah, my memory of Sean thinking about the results of his studies was that he seemed pretty like unsure of the MOA stuff. Like he seemed to think
he seemed unsure of that. I remember as well. I think he did. He did say like maybe there's an issue with methodology here, et cetera, et cetera. He was just unsure generally.
I think actually what the more accurate timeline is that he like did the study. He felt that way. He talked about it at
we are a slideshow.
Yeah. No, I see it.
Sorry, guys. MacBook issues.
I don't like on actual ping. You guys look fine.
No, but the stream is gone.
It's gone, or it's just poopy.
It's poopy.
Yeah, it looks fine now. Because Cameron left. No, but frick, what was I gonna say?
I kicked the USB cable on the PC.
We're slideshow again. Cameron came back. We're slideshow.
Wait, if I turn it off, does it fix it?
Yeah. No. You guys.
What the hell is going on?
Blaine and Griffin were still. Yeah.
Okay, so the timeline. What I was saying is that Sean said that, showed us the MOA stuff, whatever.
Yeah.
But then later we had a conversation on Blue Sky where he was talking about his conversations with Todd Welty and how I think they came to the conclusion that acoustic source impedance is too big of a kind of unknown variable.
Yeah.
That like strongly examining the results of the MOA study is probably not the smartest idea at current. But But
Yeah,
personally,
but
this to me says like what we should actually be doing is using the AirPods Pro 2 as our replicator headphone, because it's gonna keep the basal FR under like 4 kilohertz consistent, at least as a starting point.
I don't know, man. That thing is such a weird product. There's a lot of unit variation in it too, apparently.
I mean, yeah, but that doesn't matter. We just need
pick
one of them.
Yeah.
we just
Yeah.
And I will say, like, the measurements for the first time, the measurements I took of the AirPods Pro 2 that are on my database at the different levels are finally, like, I can finally EQ the thing with like
Did you have
good
to
accuracy.
Any meat sensing?
For the measurements I did, yeah.
Yeah. What did you use to meat sense? Did you have
salami.
One in your salami? Yeah. You need ham or salami, yeah. No, I guess my unit is just out of spec.
Like, I think so.
Yeah. But yeah, so to get back to what we're talking about with the IEM research. Yeah, my point is just that I got the feeling that he feels like he needs to continue to do the IEM research, and that maybe one of the things that they'd look at adjusting is the treble. But the point as it relates to this is still 2019 that we're talking about, because that's the current one that is published. And someone was asking if there's JM1 for over-ear headphones, and then somebody responded saying Sound Guy's target seems to follow that premise. No, it does not.
No,
it just happens.
JM1 is a DF HRTF. It is not not a target curve like that. There is a JM1 for headphones. In fact, the JM1 for headphones precludes JM1. It's the ISO 11904-2. What did I say?
Precludes?
Precludes. Well, no, it doesn't.
No.
It doesn't preclude. Yeah.
All right. Okay, so did anybody else get a chance to hear the Crin IEMs? Because I did.
I mean, I did. I talked about it already on our...
Yeah.
I didn't get a chance to hear shit.
Yeah. How was your guys' can jams generally?
Felt like it went rough and did 5 minutes.
Started what?
Started rough, ended well.
Did either of you guys get a chance to talk to Dr. Olive after during the event at length?
Yes.
Not at length, but a little bit, yeah.
I was just curious what his reaction was to your talk, Blaine.
Oh, I talked to him at some length about that because I was giving him the wine I got him. So I figured, hey, good opportunity. No, he was he was quite positive about it. I mean, obviously, Sean is an extremely dry guy in terms of his wit,
in terms of his praise.
Yeah, no, but he was generally pretty positive about it. So it seems like he's happy where I'm going with things, I think, which is good to hear.
That is good. And Axel Grell, you guys got a chance to... I caught up with him, so...
I had dinner with him.
Yeah.
Constantine and I spent 2.5 hours trying to figure out what he was talking about in his presentation.
No, but I really liked his that one big slide, the first slide that he did there. That was like, do you remember the one where it's like he's like, these are the things that we're measuring here, and these are all the other factors that go into perception that are outside of that. I thought that was kind of even just as an indication of like, the human perception of this stuff. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else. Folks are asking if we heard the Fosse planar. Yes. Let's start spicy hour, guys. Start dropping them peppers. The Crinier stuff is interesting. Reference sounded pretty good to me, which is surprising to me because it does have an elevation in the area where I usually have, as Griffin calls it, the ouchie zone. At around like 5 kilohertz. But it didn't have as much of a length mode as Mega did for me.
Yeah.
So like reference was still like right on the edge of shouty and glary for me, but it wasn't as egregious as Meta.
Yeah, I feel like the best solution for me out of all of them would probably be taking Meta and just reducing some bass and treble. Like, I think reference is the best balance as it is currently. but I feel like I would take a little bit less bass. But once you lower the bass, the glare in the mids and treble is definitely going to be a problem. So you would need to cut a bunch of other places too. Whereas I actually found the Meta to have the best mid range, but it just had like way too much bass for the mid range. It was kind of like a K4 where it was just like a V shape.
So interestingly, I didn't necessarily have too much of an issue with the amount of bass. It was just sort of the shape of the bass was not
very mid bassy.
Yeah. Although I don't know, like my issue with it really was just the length mode more than anything else. Like
for Meta,
because like I keep thinking to myself, like if there was if it was an IEM designed perhaps with a differently shaped nozzle or something like that, where I'm able to insert it in a way where for me the in situ response doesn't have a massive, peak at whatever the 6 point whatever kilohertz thing. It's like, this is something that I imagine I could recommend for people who don't have that problem with it, because overall it seems like a reasonable response, similar to Dusk Default DSP in a way. And I know you don't like that one as much, but like for me, that's still my favorite IEM for sound signature.
I mean, it's my issue with it isn't even the sound; it's the having to use the DSP cable or EQ, right?
They fixed the issues with the DSP cable yet as well?
Not that I'm aware of. Yeah, I did see someone who just bought one who like specifically shouted out my article and was like, "I'm having the same issue. Were you able to fix it?" I was not. This was maybe a week ago. But
I mean, thankfully, like because we do have the EQ bands now, if you have a Q-Lix or something, you can replicate it. But
yeah, I guess my thinking is that you don't need to EQ that IEM if you're already EQing,
Well, which is one of the selling points of Meta. So it's supposed to be like that tuning without the need for the DSP cable.
Yeah, but then it's like the KE4 and the Da Vinci where it's like totally solid and I recommend it, right? Like I probably am going to have my own issues with it, but I think as a kind of wide scope recommendation, it's pretty easy, especially because Meta is like KE4 rather comfortable for me.
Okay. So we're in spicy hour now, guys. Drop them peppers, but I want to ask each of you guys, do you guys have a spicy take or a spicy topic? Starting with Cameron. To put you on the spot. What's your spicy take of the day?
Spicy take of the day?
Of the week, of the month. Whatever is on your mind.
God, yes. I can't think of one on the spot. IEMs are an unsolvable problem. That would be my spicy take.
Me and Blaine are nodding.
No, but I'm shaking my head only because like there being a solution is subjective to if someone feels like their problem is solved. And in my experience, IEM people are like some of the easiest to please.
That I don't disagree with. Like there's definitely a lot of kind of weird tuning stuff which IEM people seem to be more willing to accept than a lot of headphone stuff.
Yes.
I think my point was more just in the fact that like because of the inherent differences in how an IEM interacts with you versus a headphone, I don't think it without any kind of adaptive DSP and stuff that would be a solution. But in terms of just a passive IEM, I don't think it's solvable to have even as close to an ideal general response as you can have with an over-ear headphone, and that makes them quite difficult.
Yeah, I don't know. I honestly feel like a lot of our analysis of the products we currently are doing still could be better, such that like because like obviously kind of how our like situation as reviewers works is that like we interact with a product for review and then we figure out all the stuff we don't like about it. I feel like the figuring out all the stuff we don't like about it could be done better and like less specifically about us and more about how it generally suits people. I already mentioned it once, but I feel like the fact that we are only taking single seatings of IEM measurements still for the most part.
Well, okay.
Not great.
I want to say usually what happens for me, at least, is kind of the inverse, which is that like I'll measure an IEM, it'll measure fine, but then I hear something that is not shown there in the measurement, and I have to recognize that for other people that problem won't be there.
Well, so no, but you could take a measurement that reflects that problem.
Not always. I can't necessarily, because again, for me, it's usually at around 6.1 kilohertz, and that does not show up on certain IEMs, regardless of what the insertion depth is, just because of the nature of that ear canal.
Interesting. Well, do you mean like the damping?
I mean, so usually what happens is that there is a change in amplitude at a given frequency, but it's not at the frequency where I have that problem. You can show the change in amplitude because you can show a difference in, like, because you can use like flange tips, for example, versus, you know, showing it at the ear canal entrance, and you can, you know, like it's usually somewhere in the treble, like lower to mid treble area, right? But what I don't see is a shift necessarily in frequency to exactly where I have the problem.
You're saying like you haven't been able to get it shallowly enough inserted to meet where the length feature is for you, or
could be that, could be that, yeah.
Oh, okay. Because I was gonna say I've definitely, like, when I had time with the 5128, I was definitely able to do that. But you do need to use a different pair of tips. Like you need to size up the tips and change how you couple the tips. Like no more of like the kind of just like jamming it in there and just like, you know, trying your best to get a seal. It's more so about deforming the tip correctly to actually fit the
because oftentimes
what happens.
Oftentimes what happens is that the tip will fold or buckle.
Yeah, you got to make it fold the right way. Yeah.
Yeah. So
I came up with a method for that. We should hop on a voice chat sometime, and I'll kind of show you what I'm talking about, because I was able to get a lot of shallow insert measurements, and that's kind of like I mentioned it with the whole Kyle listening to the Soft Ears Volume S and DaVinci thing, but I also think a lot of people I talk to have lower length modes and longer canals and are probably getting like leaner responses because of it. And I would like to see that like represented as, you know, part of the possibility space.
Yeah, I still kind of think that there's a question of like, what is the default representation versus what is the outlier, and recognizing when one is the outlier, being able to say like, or even for example, like this is the typical, like here are the things that we can speak about with confidence. Here are the things that we can't at all, because they are bound to propagate differently across people.
Yeah, I just think we're not collecting enough data to know what is the outlier. Like as far as I'm aware, that like the people kind of putting out the most 5128 data of IEMs, I mean, based on how I saw Kryn kind of using it and kind of what I assume you're doing something similar, is that we're taking like one seating, like usually pretty deep into the 5128.
Well, usually what it is you take the tips that you have available to you, and then you try and you get whatever seating gives you a seal, right? You do this with pink noise or whatever, right? You show an RTA basically where the seal is for that given tip, and the tip itself is potentially also going to the seal is going to be created at a different length as well, depending on the tip.
So what I was doing is like say with the Zero Blue 2, like it has a bunch of tips in different sizes, and you take the smallest tip, and that's the one you use for a deep insertion, because obviously as the canal narrows, that's the one that's going to deform least and kind of fit the actual size of the canal there best, and that's how you get deep insert. And then with shallow insert, you kind of bring it as shallow as you can, and the largest tip kind of nestling in the canal entrance, and then that gives you the range. And already just from taking those two measurements, you get a better idea of like how one measurement across that spectrum kind of relates to the overall size of the ear canal. Whereas if you just take one measurement, you don't really have that data of like what's an outlier, right?
I kind of base this a little bit more on how the IEM actually fits in the cradle of the concha.
I mean, I get that.
It's like that's kind of an indication of how it's gonna sit in the ear of a person. Like you don't know for sure, but You know,
Yeah,
like if there's certain things that like prevent it, like a good example would be the Power Beats Pro 2, where it just doesn't fucking sit at all in the ear of the thing. But it like you need to, you know, the hooks need to dig into the cartilage of the ear in order for it to actually, you know, work. So
yeah, I mean, so I get that, but I'm also just thinking of the fact that because the 5128 is just an average, a good one, but just an average, I feel like I have a bit of a desire to use it more like a coupler, like the normal thing where because it's an average, I still want to have some accounting for the people who sit towards the outlier, outer bounds
You're
of that
basically
average.
using it as an ear canal, an average ear canal length mode simulator.
Right. I mean, the outer ear stuff doesn't matter for the
Yeah.
IEM. So like I'm just basing it on what the lowest volume I can get with the seal is and what the highest volume I can get with the seal is. And that kind of gives me the
I think
bounds.
that's reasonable.
I mean, yeah, I think it's more likely to show the range as it actually exists on people because you can get an 8K like length mode with a lot of things on the
8K, yes.
5128.
I often
can't go much higher than that, but
yeah.
like you know, you can reach that, but you can also get 6K. Like you can.
Well, let's go through some later on.
Well, yeah, we'll talk about it.
Yeah. Okay. Other spicy takes. Blaine, what is your
There
spicy? There are a few in chat, but I want to get one from Blaine.
Hold on. Sorry, someone was talking about Baxendale filters in the chat, and I was saying, you know, there's a reasonable reason you might prefer those. Anyway, so my spicy take, I don't really have a spicy take, spicy observation, I guess. Weird number of people came up to me and were like preemptively defensive about liking cables. Like it was only like 3, but that was still weird.
Dude, I've had people come up to me. It wasn't this Can Jam, but it was one of the previous ones. Someone came up to me angrily saying, Blaine is wrong. Not you're wrong. Not you, Andrew.
Blaine is wrong.
Blaine
Tell
is
him.
Wrong.
See, I wish I'd been there. I want to fight them.
It's like, what am I supposed to do with that? I don't know. Okay.
No, but so someone in chat says they're taking the piss. No. Like they weren't like angry. It was like they'd be trying something and they'd be like, "Oh, you know, I'm not one of those guys, but ever since I got a silver cable for my, you know, for my H800, it just really opened up. So do you think that you guys would have anything different?" And I was like, "Sorry, dude, only copper here."
Don't we have
this happens.
FCC cables technically?
Huh?
Aren't
Well, we have silver plated, yeah. But it's
God. And they're only like $100, so you don't need to pay $8 billion and sell a kidney. So
true. But no, but that basic pattern of interaction happened a few times, and they were always like, "Oh, I'm not one of those crazy guys." But this either cables or some other weird tweak thing made a massive difference for me, and I'm just like, you clearly know that you sound crazy. I don't need to know this. Why are you telling me this?
Yeah. I'm not one of those crazy guys, but I'm one of those crazy guys.
I'm not one of those crazy guys, but they've been gang stalking me.
The ones with cables that I really don't get are when the cables that like at least even though it actually doesn't matter, at least with, you know, oh, silver is more conductive than copper, so it must be better. You can understand the logic behind the argument, right? But there are people that buy like palladium cables or, you know, USB and SPDIF cables that are intentionally completely the wrong spec to the point that they don't even work with a lot of stuff. And like that, why would you pay like a, you know, couple grand for a cable that is demonstrably not a good conductor?
The conduction is implied.
Is implied.
Yeah, it's
someone was asking why there aren't listening to open backs at shows like CanJam is almost pointless. Why aren't there at least minimal soundproofing or sound absorption boxes at CanJam for people to stick their heads in?
Boy.
They are really expensive and really difficult to set up. We've done it a few times for the Aperio. It takes about 6-7 hours in some cases to get it all built and put together, plus the cost of shipping it, which is more than it actually costs us to have a booth at CanJam. It's not cheap, which is why they don't do it. At Munich High End, they have like rooms which they set up for some of them, so that could be
some
good.
Some brands do have those like dedicated rooms that are away from the show floor.
Yeah, separate rooms.
Yeah.
Ironically, the best way that Can Jam could work would be like being on a hotel floor level and just having each brand have their own room in terms of avoiding it being super loud.
By the way, did you guys get to experience the absolutely fucking insane influencer competition on the floor above us?
I heard about it and intentionally avoided. Like,
okay,
people were live streaming themselves doing a lot of things, usually walking or sitting, sometimes eating.
I felt cringe just passing the floor on the elevator.
I had to go up and down the elevator constantly because I was constantly like going into the seminar room to record them, right? So I'd go and start the recording and go back down, and so I constantly encountered these people, and yeah, they were competing to see who could get the most followers, and it was exactly as vapid as it sounds.
Fuck yeah!
There was a Model UN on the floor below us, though, and that was fun.
That was cool.
So
there's a guy that comes to a lot of Can Jams. He works for the UN as well. He's a very interesting guy.
I was on the way up to up the elevator at one point with a somebody who works for a headphone company. I won't say who. But as we passed the floor above us, a whole bunch of these kids, these influencers, came into the elevator with us, and they all had these really obnoxious lights that were mounted to the tops of their...
the ring light things.
Yeah. But they all left them on. They just had them on the whole time, right? And this person this manufacturer, who is a little bit also, I guess, maybe just doesn't care, right? Like, and you guys probably know who this is, was like, while they're there, just like says to me randomly, "Gosh, those lights are annoying." And then he gets off at like one of the other floors, and I'm still on the elevator going up. And then one of the kids looks at me and goes, "That guy's a hater. He's a hater." I was like, "No, he's just being realistic. You guys suck."
See, here's the difference between you and me. I would have said that.
Yeah. Well, it was too late. But yes, I would have said that. You would have.
The lack of shame, I guess, is the best way of putting it.
Quite a lot
of like, I mean, Jesus Christ, I'm not even 30. I feel like I'm already kids these days. But it's like there are genuinely a lot of younger people that seem to just actually be incapable of feeling embarrassment, and it's really weird.
Did you see the spinny Times Square rig that they had, where like you can pay $20 or whatever, and it spins a camera around you while you twirl in Times Square?
I haven't seen that.
Did you guys know that at the top of that hotel there's like a spinning restaurant?
Also,
doesn't surprise me. Doesn't surprise me.
I feel like once I saw that, it finally made sense how that hotel is laid out, like with that long spire with the elevators in the center.
Yeah. I don't know. Every time I go to New York, I'm just reminded of like the fact that there's no need to go to New York.
Man, so I feel bad that like for you and probably Blaine, because like you're just going for the show, you don't really get to see any of
we saw lots of New York. We had a ton of fun going to that Airbnb of Doom.
No, you didn't. You went to Riverside Park and gotten a terrible Airbnb. That is not seeing New York. Although I will confess that is somewhat close to some typical experiences.
There you go.
No, I mean last Can Jam, the day after, I had just completely spare, so I spent like 7 hours walking around with Constantine. We went to like this former dock warehouse or something that had turned into some sort of twee little mall. Lots of crafts and small businesses.
I will say
it was terrible.
I would take New York over LA every time. New York has places and things that are genuinely great and are worth seeing. I just the vibe in general is much better, but there's just too much people. There's just too much city everywhere, and I get overwhelmed.
Yeah, I feel like you would probably quite like Brooklyn and Queens, but I don't think
I like Brooklyn when I went there. That was all right.
Yeah.
But anyway,
I highly doubt that I would like Brooklyn or Queens.
No, God, no. No. You would not. Yeah. You not liking New York makes all the sense in the world to me.
Yeah.
I gave it a fair shot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know if you walked downtown or uptown when you were with Constantine?
North. Is that up?
Interesting. That is uptown, yeah.
Mm-hmm. While listening to Uptown Funk.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd want to live in New York. I think I'm with Ryan. It's very cool to visit. Living there would be weird.
Yeah, it's definitely
I
better
could
to
pass
visit.
on the visiting.
Yeah.
No, I mean, the Airbnb. So here's the thing, right? The Airbnb experience was like so hilariously non-functional, but that was also part of what made it funny. Like,
So
looking back on it, it was quite
putting that in the video. I forgot about that. Like, you asked me for my picture and footage and stuff. Did that actually get broadcast?
I don't.
The
door bit did, yeah.
Oh God, the door bit was
also,
great.
it turns out that Airbnbs aren't allowed in New York. Like that Airbnb shouldn't actually have been a thing. So we're not sure how that happened.
A lot more there, like the fact that the lock on the door kept saying low battery. Like, just there's so many things that were just not. It's different. Like, yeah, we should have done like a walk.
It was a faulty type of sketch. It was just
But it built character.
I wish that we'd known when we did the door opening bit that there was a full walk-in closet in that room, because that really would just have been so much better content.
Yeah,
that's just. Would you like to be able to open the door or have a walk-in closet? You can pick one.
If you can't walk into the room, you may as well be able to walk in
the room's not a walk-in room. It's just.
Griffin, any spicy takes from you?
Oh, I forgot we were doing that. Yeah, maybe not a spicy take, but a spicy experience. I actually think, and this was just last night when I finally got a chance to try it. Listening to a properly measured, properly equalized AirPods Pro 2 is like probably the best audio experience I've ever had, honestly. like genuinely, that, that feeling, Andrew, where as you start to like pull down like peaks and weird things that are happening on your head with an over-ear headphone, like the unveiling that happens, like where everything is just there.
It becomes naked to the world. Everything.
It's not that,
there.
but it becomes
just flapping in the wind.
No, I don't really know how to describe it other than like the lack of peaks and dips makes for
your brain has to do less of that
image, not necessarily in space, but that, it's not spread out or, fenestrated or any other weird stuff. It was the most like clear sound experience I've had that wasn't speakers. Actually, no, it was clearer than speakers. There was no room bullshit. I don't really have words to describe it other than it was the most normal sounding anything I'd ever listened to.
Extra normal.
Yeah, like even more so than like this when I have it EQ'd as well as I can get it.
That's just a skill issue.
Well, with this, I mean, probably, to an extent. I mean, there's also things you can't fix though. Like there's a big like 7.5K dip on my head that like I can't really like fill in, but that doesn't exist with the AirPods Pro 2 in my ear. Like there are no massive.
I mean, is it like phase cancellation, or what's the cause of the?
It's probably something like that, right? Like anytime I've tried to fill it in, it just doesn't.
It doesn't. Okay.
Doesn't work.
There's also the signal to noise benefits too of having blocked.
Yeah, and with the AirPods Pro 2, I was able to use transparency mode, so it was like, it wasn't also
a single driver.
Yeah,
a single.
I need to get
I measured the distortion of those at max volume. Nothing. Like nothing. Like less than 1% at disgusting volumes.
Yeah, I need to get a new unit of that because the one that I have, the treble sounds bad, just straight up.
No, you should.
To be clear, I still like the rest of it, but the treble, not a fan.
Yeah, so now I'm trying to get more into like Rune, because Rune actually, with the arc thing, you can actually EQ on iOS. And if I were able to have EQ with my AirPods Pro 2 on my iPhone, it's over. What was I using to EQ AirPods Pro? I was using my laptop with Sound Source from Rogue Amoeba.
All right. Chat, you guys are letting us down with the spicy takes.
Yeah, there's nothing.
Honestly, it might be an early day for me. I'm still kind of fucking exhausted.
Yeah.
All right. We can end the stream there on that terrible disappointment. But I don't think we're gonna do stage today, right? We'll
I'm not,
save
at
that for the
least.
next one.
I'm too hungry.
Okay. We'll call it there, guys. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. Blaine, do you want to take us out?
As always, we are brought to you by Headphones.com, your #1 place to learn about and buy audio equipment. Headphones, speakers, DACs, amps, cables, pretty much everything you could possibly need for headphones except a headphone stand. The stream and, in fact, all the content on our channel and on our blog, the audio files, is completely supported by Headphones.com. We make basically no money off of like YouTube, because nobody makes money off YouTube anymore. So if you like this, please buy something from there to show your support. If you're Canadian, we do have a limited selection that ships from Canada on the headphones.ca. And in addition to the stores, we have multiple audio communities. Forum.headphones.com is a traditional forum at forum.headphones.com, and discord.gg/headphones, which is the headphones.com official Discord. You can interact with us all, mostly, in both of them, particularly on Discord for me, particularly on the forum for some other folks. So please be there and contribute. As we called to action before, we have a thread on the forums which gives suggestions for topics. Please make them, because we're kind of running out of topics. It turns out you can only do an audio podcast about headphones for so long without retreading stuff. And yeah. Oh, right. And of course,
a bit of a revamp recently as well, so you should go and check it out. It's a lot easier to find stuff now.
And of course, if you want to buy something and support us, know that you can buy with confidence with a 365-day return policy on almost all the things we stock. If it does not have that policy, it will be clearly marked. So anything without that, you can buy with absolute confidence that if you buy it, you will end up with what you want.
Oh, also, I assume we can get it done today. If you're available, Andrew. Keep an eye out for my Zero Blue 2 review, which
should be up soon.
Yeah, and basically just needs an okay from this guy.
Yeah. Alrighty, guys. And with that, we will see you guys in the next Noise Floor live stream.
Goodbye, everyone.